Tonight, the presidential contest has reached fever pitch, and the nexus of the race is Iowa.
The Democratic candidates, they brace for results from more than 1,600 precincts.
Will it be a squeaker, or will one contender break away from the pack?
We are all in for the Iowa caucuses.
Welcome to Hill TV's live coverage of the Iowa caucuses. After more than a year of buildup with 7 debates and nearly 30 major candidates making bids for the White House, we have come to the first major contest of this primary season.
It is finally here, although just for the first opportunity for voters to weigh in on the race. A victory in Iowa could be a crucial springboard for a campaign. It gives momentum as the primary season heats up.
Indeed, and we're going to have a lot of guests tonight to help us break it down. Right now, you're getting a live look at Darby Gymnasium. That is at Grinnell College in Grinnell, Iowa, where Iowans are caucusing to choose their candidate for president. Now, keep in mind, this is a college town kind of place where Bernie Sanders typically does well, and I did actually just see the results of the first alignment there where he was doing well. He was in the 40s. Warren was coming in second at 28%. But let's just talk a little bit about how this is all going to work, Saagar.
Yeah, it's important for everybody to actually understand the dynamics. I know we've been covering it, but if you missed it, we have a little graphic that we can throw up there. There's something called the first alignment. Now, that's what's basically happening right now. We can think of that almost as a popular vote type figure. That means if you support whomever you support, you show up, you stand with your group for that candidate on the first ballot, so to speak. Now, after that, there's going to be a second and possibly even a third alignment, in which if you do not have 15%, now there are 1,700 precincts. Each precinct, you have to show 15% support. If you don't, you can have a couple of options. You can disband, you can leave the caucus. There are other people in the caucus sites who are supporters. They'll be giving speeches saying, please vote for my candidate, please vote for my candidate, etc. And then they're going to have another alignment in which you have the opportunity to go and join a candidate that already has that 15%. So the way then is that those alignment figures are used to calculate the state delegate equivalents, and whoever comes out of Iowa with the most state delegates is technically the winner. But as you all know, there are now, for the first time, we're going to have all 3 of those numbers.
That's right.
Which is very exciting. We're going to have that first alignment figure, that final alignment, and then the delegates, Krystal.
And we talked to Pete Buttigieg surrogate Jennifer Holdsworth, great friend of the show, as well earlier today. And that campaign really was trying to suppress the idea that that first raw vote, the popular vote total, is significant. She went so far as to say it would be unfair to tout the results of that. Of course, the Sanders campaign outperformed in that metric last time versus Hillary Clinton. So they've been sort of planning on potentially touting that result if it's favorable for them. We also got some last minute information in tonight that's pretty interesting that we wanted to share with you, which is that last Des Moines Register poll that at the last minute was spiked because Pete's team complained about how it was conducted. The information in that poll was leaked. 538 actually
Claire Malone over at 538.
The numbers, and so pretty interesting there. Shows Sanders at 22. Shows Warren coming in second. What is she at? 18?
18%.
Pete at 16 and Biden at 13. 13 in 4th place, which would mean that at a lot of these caucus sites, he would not reach that viability threshold. And in fact, anecdotally, we are seeing that starting to happen across the state.
I've got my computer in front of me, and we're getting live updates from people on the ground. Dave Wasserman, he's one of the most down-the-middle, best election analysts there is. He says widespread reports of Joe Biden barely or not viable in the types of precincts that he should have any type of chance. Have a hard time seeing him in the top 3, but adds that there is a long way to go. That is generally what we are beginning to see on the ground. So we're also seeing that for the very first time, of the people who've never attended an Iowa caucus before, they are breaking 23 for Biden, 19 Sanders, 19 Buttigieg.
Those are the people that have attended.
Sorry, that have attended an Iowa caucuses before. And then we saw with younger people that have attended the Iowa caucuses, they are overwhelmingly supporting Bernie Sanders at 51%. With older voters, I think it's 37% for Joe Biden. But this time time around, a larger number of young people are making up the electorate. So it's an exciting time just to look at all this information.
So let's go ahead and set the stage with what the Real Clear Politics average was going into Iowa. What we saw there was Sanders with an edge, though not a huge edge, about 4 points there. And again, this is not a cherry-picked poll. This is the average of all polls. So it had Sanders in the lead. It had Biden in second. Now, of course, the early reports show him underperforming that mark, but of course, it is still very early. Pete in third. Of course, he had led in Iowa at 1 point, but has kind of fallen back. And Warren right there at 15%. Another person that people have been keeping an eye on is Amy Klobuchar. She got that half endorsement from the New York Times and has seemed to pick up a little bit of momentum from that. But what we're seeing so far is she hasn't been able to get viability in a number of these caucus sites. Again, it's very early. And then also, of course, we've been following closely Andrew Yang's campaign. Now, Andrew has a very similar theory of the case to Bernie Sanders.
He does.
It's all about addition through bringing new people into the caucus, especially young people. He's made a heavy push in the state in these last days. He's done more events than any other candidate. So very interesting to see if he's able to outperform those poll numbers and reach viability at a number of these sites. So he has a shot to pick up delegates as well.
I'm looking at the first alignment in Iowa City, precinct number 15. Pretty stunning number here. Sanders 98, Warren 69, Buttigieg 30, Yang 21, Klobuchar 16, Biden 14. So Biden Yang beating Joe Biden and Amy Klobuchar in Iowa City. That's a pretty critical place, and that's actually, it makes a lot of sense because there's a lot of younger students there. And so yeah, granted all of those caveats, but just generally what we are seeing, people on the ground is saying Biden generally underwhelming in terms of his expectations, matching that leaked Des Moines Register poll with Biden at 13%. And as I said this morning, that would be a stunning development.
This morning, by the way,
whatever.
Just saying.
Do a little self-plug here. But look, Biden at 13%, Biden comes in fourth. I think he's absolutely done tonight.
Right.
Look, we don't know what the results are yet. So.
Still very early, and we've got a lot of guests who are going to bring in now.
I cannot wait. Okay. So we have friend of the show, Michael Brooks. He's going to unpack. Some of this analysis with us. Michael, it's great to see you. What are you hearing? What are you thinking for tonight?
Well, I think it's looking good for Bernie Sanders. I mean, as we've been expecting. The one thing that I'm concerned about is because he's been polling so well, relatively speaking, and we know that they're going to go to war against him in every way, shape, and form. They already have. I felt the pressure in the last couple of days to actually be like the margin. You know, like, oh, he only won by 2 points. And of course, the only real result is who's runner-up. But I think you know, so we can anticipate the spin, and I know, you know, no offense, but we know, you know, one of Chris Matthews' like imaginary dock worker friends from 1970 has warned him about the danger of voting for Bernie Sanders. But I don't think that's translating with real people or what Bernie's assembled.
Yeah,
I think it's looking good.
We should say too for the audience that Michael is a Bernie Sanders supporter, so keep that in mind.
I'm for Klobuchar. Balls and strikes.
Switched these last couple of days.
The New York Times half endorsement swayed me.
That
so
won you
powerful.
over. I know.
Absolutely.
I thought about it then too as well. But you know, what are you seeing that is giving you hope that sort of Bernie is living up to the polling hype? Because he has definitely seen a surge. Even the mainstream in the past couple of weeks have had to take him seriously as a contender, at least in Iowa. What specifically is giving you sort of hope tonight that the results are going to match up with that polling expectation?
Well, we'll see, obviously. But I think the indication, I mean, there's random bits of data coming in that sound good and people are giving positive indications. But it always struck me, I mean, look, several months ago when he was down in the polls and people were saying, yes, but there's going to be this secret surge that will make up for it, that's fantasy thinking. On the other hand, he does have the best ground game and he does actually have grassroots momentum. So I always thought if you go into Iowa and the traditional metrics, which might underappreciate him a little bit, he's leading on, I think he is going to turn those people out, and that's why I'm feeling confident.
I think you're right, Michael. I look at it very much as a Trump phenomenon, which is the same thing, because he didn't even win Iowa, but which is that whenever you can consolidate on the 23%, and then after he did in New Hampshire, what he had to do was prove to people that the mainstream media was wrong, that he could win. And the moment that he did that, he got 52% of the vote in Nevada. I'll never forget that, because I looked at that and I said, oh my God, he's going to win the nomination. There's just there's nothing else can do that. And I want to butt in here, Jennifer Jacobs, a reporter reporter I deeply trust. She was from Iowa. She reports for Bloomberg News. She says she's getting reports from, she used to run the Des Moines Register, saying that Biden is not viable at some of the bigger caucuses across the state. And this is somebody who absolutely would know. So again, as we continue to get rolling information here, kind of the thesis of the show is really becoming, is coming true. And it's kind of amazing to watch it all happen in real time. And that is what it is. And what you're getting at, Michael, is that the organizational kind of model of campaign, we haven't seen this happen since 2008 with Barack Obama. And Sanders has that energy.
Who is the largest group of voters? It's non-voters. And so Sanders' campaign and also Yang's campaign have really made it their mission to bring new people into the process. And you talked about little bits of data that you can see. Look, they're anecdotal. At this early stage, you don't want to draw too many conclusions from it. But it was really interesting to see at a caucus site, one of the satellite caucuses that happened in advance for pork processing workers, mostly an immigrant workforce that had to be at work tonight. They worked the second shift, so they were going to be working late, wouldn't be able to participate in the normal caucus. And Sanders overwhelmingly won that caucus. He had all but one supporter there, was for him, which just to me was an indicator that, you know, we hear from the campaign all the time that they're doing this work, that they're turning out these people, that they're reaching these groups that have never been reached before. When I saw those people showing up to vote for Bernie Sanders, these immigrant workers from a pork processing plant, I thought, my God, like they really did it.
And to
you know, they really actually did it.
I saw a tweet from a previous guest on my show, Adoma Kechiachu, who's an international relations scholar in Chicago, and she was like, "Oh, I phone banked these guys for the Sanders campaign."
Wow.
So you do start to kind of accumulate that. The one thing that's surprising me is I've always thought this is a Sanders-Biden race. And I thought there's a lot of obvious weaknesses with Biden, but I did not expect this level of deterioration.
I will say,
if those numbers hold up.
Nate Silver has a early analysis here based on gender split as listed. Entrance polls show it Sanders 22, Buttigieg 20, Biden 18. Warren 17. So actually a little bit
more like what I would think.
It is, but it's actually a bit softer support for Elizabeth Warren there, Krystal.
Indeed, than what we've been seeing from some of the other anecdotal evidence that is out there. But I mean, so far, very strong performance for the progressives in general. I mean, I think the other thing, Michael, that we've been kind of thinking about is if Biden does end up coming in fourth tonight and really sort of seeing a collapse in support, person waiting down the road
Mini Mike
to pick up the pieces potentially is Mike Bloomberg.
This is my thesis.
Nina Turner, great friend of the show, Sanders national campaign co-chair, was fighting on MSNBC about oligarchs already. So clearly the Sanders team sees that potentially coming down the road as well. And look, if you think Biden has vulnerabilities on Social Security as one example, Mike Bloomberg has that in spades. Still supporting Iraq war basically to this day, wanted to cut Social Security, endorsed George W. Bush, all of those things.
And John McCain.
So look, he's out there with hundreds of millions of dollars in TV ads without having faced any of that scrutiny yet. But he's got a lot of vulnerabilities if it comes down to Bernie and Bloomberg.
Oh yeah, let's go to the Midwest with an e-cig regulation and no jobs package. That's exactly how we should run against Donald Trump. But I think the thing that's really interesting to me is Trump's Super Bowl ad, where he highlighted giving clemency to the woman whose name, unfortunately,
Alice Brie Johnson.
Yes. Yeah. Now, all credit, frankly, to Kim Kardashian for that, for making that happen. But what struck me, if you look at the ad, is one, given Trump's total narcissism, it's amazing how non-present he is in that ad. And also, some of the words that flashed on the screen, including reunited with family and things like that. And that tells me that the Trump campaign has a sense that in their voters they need to swing have some discomfort with kidnapping children, with the perception on racism, frankly. And the second thought I had was, if he gets Bloomberg or Biden, he will shamelessly run to their left on criminal justice.
No doubt about it.
He can attack Mike Bloomberg on stop and frisk in both directions. It's a racist policy, it's an over-policing policy, but it was a gun control policy. You can mobilize your base and you can make some inroads. So, but the Democratic establishment will obviously line up behind Bloomberg. I was
very intrigued by that choice. A, because it's kind of counter to what Trump ran on in the first place, but B, it showed me that they're actually making that. We actually hear blow smoke from the campaign all the time. It says, oh, we're going to go after African-American voters. That actually made it serious to me, which is like, wow, because look, if you even make the margin, right now it's 90%. If you make it 85 or 80, the whole game
or get some people to stay home.
Or if you
get some people to stay home, or if you've got a handful of people to say, I'm actually pretty disgusted by that specific area, but I want the permission to stay because of other things I like. And, there was an Onion headline earlier today saying that Tom Perez was looking to enlist Donald Trump to stop Bernie Sanders.
We saw some fans of the show tag this
but I shared that one as well.
No, Bloomberg is a disaster.
Well, it's interesting. So Dave Wasserman, he's throwing up a reality check, but it's a reality check for later. He says reality check is that the caucus, it's rewards passion, particularly to people on the left. I actually saw analysis that the electorate this time around in Iowa is almost 20% self-identified liberal than they were in 2008. And of course, that's when Barack Obama was still able to win. So that's pretty interesting. But 90% white and very young. So right here, he's saying exits are showing it around 21% under 35. And as we know, Michael, that Sanders cleans up in that demographic all day long.
Yeah.
So, really
interesting too. This is from the NBC News entry poll. And look, these entry polls and exit polls and everything have been historically not the greatest. So take them with a giant grain of salt. But what they found was that for voters between 17 and 29, that younger demographic, Sanders was at 51. So winning a majority of those voters, which is really astonishing. Buttigieg was next all the way down at 16, Warren 11, Biden 4. Voters 65 and up, Biden 37, strength, but not overwhelming like Sanders and the younger folks. Buttigieg second at 22, Warren 10, Sanders 4. So almost an exact flip, except with the younger folks, Sanders outperforms what Biden is doing with the 65 and older.
And you just need to drag them down. And Joe Biden, frankly, spending the last month talking about Social Security was an interesting tactical choice of his. And I would imagine that would, not be exactly the way he would want to consolidate his support.
Well, and we're going to talk to Ryan Grimm here shortly, but something he's been tracking closely is that conversation about Social Security has seemed to really benefit Bernie Sanders because he just needed to pull down the margins from Biden a little bit with middle-aged folks and older. And what the recent polling has shown is they have indeed shifted in their support from Biden to Sanders. And also, look, again, anecdotal evidence, but going into these caucuses, there was a massive Google search spike in people who were looking up Biden's Social Security. So this was clearly breaking through to voters. It was getting under Biden's skin. He was getting very snippy about it, handing out talking points rather than trying to address it directly. This is one of those issues that, look, the media doesn't find it sexy, doesn't talk about it that much, but for millions upon millions of people, this is central to their lives.
By the way,
a critical issue.
Including younger people.
That's
people
right.
have to support their parents. Where do people think the holes in the safety net go? That has a major implication on people's earning potential and on income inequality.
Yeah, and so I have got now some very, very early numbers here, basically showing very tight race with 20 out of 1,700 precincts, but it's showing very close race between Pete Buttigieg and Bernie Sanders.
Both of them basically at 22%.
Virtual tie at 22%. Then Biden and Elizabeth Warren in the 16%, so almost not even in the same level of viability there. Again, very, very early numbers.
Amy, we should say close by at 14% in those, again, really super early numbers. We don't know exactly where those are coming from. Are they college towns? Are they not? Are they industrial, rural, urban? We don't know, but those are the overall numbers right now.
McKinsey campus.
The McKinsey campus.
Anything's possible.
Right, the McKinsey office is August.
Exactly.
I did see that Sanders apparently did not reach viability in the most wealthy precinct, so I'm sorry about
that.
What a surprise.
All right, Michael's going to come back and join us more later with more of his sparkling analysis, but next, the candidates have been on the trail for months. Let's take a quick look at some of what they had to say.
I know what's broken, I know how to fix it, and I'm going to lead the fight to get it done.
We have to get our country working for us again instead of the other way around.
I'm running because the decisions we make in the next 3 or 4 years are going to decide how the next 30 or 40 go.
We must do more than just defeat Donald Trump. We need to deliver a win for the American people.
We have to restore the soul of this country.
Nothing will change unless we have the guts to take on Wall Street, the insurance industry, the pharmaceutical industry, the military-industrial complex, and the fossil fuel industry.
It is not left, it is not right, it is forward.
All right, our next guest has done some in-depth reporting on many of the campaigns, from Vice President Biden to Mayor Pete to Elizabeth Warren. He has given voters much-needed clarity on many of the candidates.
He also happens to be the D.C. bureau chief of The Intercept and a great friend of the show. Ryan Grimm himself joins us via Skype from Iowa. Ryan, what are you seeing on the ground there, my friend? What are the noteworthy things that the audience needs to know?
Well, I'm at a fascinating caucus here at King Elementary School in a working class neighborhood here in Des Moines. So this precinct in 2016 had 8 delegates. 5 went to Hillary Clinton, 3 went to Bernie Sanders. Tonight, it looks like Bernie Sanders could easily walk out of here with 5 or 6 of the delegates, which is a remarkable flip from 2016. I'll see if I can show you a little bit of this right now. So right now the candidates right now people are kind of giving their speech saying why you should vote for us. But this back here is Bernie.
Wow.
He had about 70 supporters out of 133 are Bernie. The only other candidate that seems viable here is Joe Biden, who's right behind me here. But if he's viable, he's barely viable. Like he's right at the threshold. So you could be looking at an 85-15 or something blowout. Now, the Elizabeth Warren people are close to viability and are going to try to team up with the Buttigieg people who are way below viability. I think it's possible that the two of them together don't even have the numbers that they're going to need to get over the top. So it's a huge turnout in this working class district for Bernie Sanders, and it's exactly what his campaign was trying to do.
And what is the nature of the demographics? I mean, it's always, I'm sure, always nervous to generalize a little bit, but generally, what types of people are supporting Bernie versus Biden versus Pete and Warren?
Interestingly, you don't see much of a difference. Now, the Mayor Pete supporters seem to be mostly white. The Warren supporters are more white than the rest. But between the Biden and Sanders supporters, there isn't really any demographic difference other than age. However, there are a lot of middle-aged and seniors here who are supporting Bernie Sanders. Surprisingly to people who might assume that anybody over the age of 40 is just not feeling it.
Mm-hmm. Ryan, we've been talking with others from working class districts, even traditionally places which are supposed, like Dubuque, which are supposed to be supporting Joe Biden or would traditionally support. They're saying that Biden is not, barely reaching viability. There's widespread reports throughout the entire state of the same phenomenon. I mean, that's kind of tracking with what you're seeing. Are you in touch with any others, maybe with fellow Intercept reporters that are seeing similar phenomenon?
Yep. Yes, and we were at a satellite caucus in a working class town about an hour and a half from Des Moines earlier today. Biden had 0 supporters show up there. Wow. This was at a union hall. At the one at 4:30 at Drake University, which is not Biden country because it was heavily students, but it was also people who worked at the university. Biden had precisely 1 supporter. And then he pitifully had to kind of go look around for someone else to caucus with. He eventually went to the Buttigieg camp. The Buttigieg people plucked somebody from the Yang camp, and even with that, they were still not viable. So only Warren and Bernie were viable at that second one. So yeah, Biden's struggling.
I always admire the people who are willing to be like that one person, that one guy for the candidate. It takes a lot of intestinal fortitude. One thing that we've tracked, Ryan, on this show, we talked to Chuck Rocha about it, and also Dan Marins, who I know is a friend of all of us, is the Sanders campaign's organizing of the Latino community in Iowa. It's about 7% of Iowa is Latino. It's a growing group that hasn't received a lot of outreach from campaigns before, and they were hoping that would kind of be the key to put them over the top here tonight. Do you see any signs of that approach paying off?
So, some of that here. So in this elementary school, there are 2 precincts, and the precincts across the hall seem to be more of a Hispanic dominance there. And we talked to a number of people in line going on the way in who were clearly they were for Sanders. They were bringing people out for Sanders. They protected by the campaign. So yeah, I think it is working.
And what about, Ryan? I know one thing you've been tracking that I've been following in your reporting is the way that the Sanders closing pitch and contrast with Joe Biden on Social Security has seemed to really pay dividends. Talk a little bit about the poll movement that we saw coming into this and the way that Sanders really made the closing pitch on that.
Yeah, so at the Intercept, we looked at the last 6 polls that came out and looked at crosstabs around middle-aged people, like around 45 to 65, and then 65 and up. And in both, Biden has been eroding and Sanders has been growing. Now, you can't say with 100% certainty that that's because of the Social Security fight, but that's the fight they've been having for the last 3 weeks. And we know that it's one of the most popular programs in the history of the country. And, intuitively, people can get, actually, Joe Biden, if he is elected president, he's not going to get a lot done, but the one thing he might get done is cut a deal with Mitch McConnell that does end up cutting Social Security like that.
It's true.
That's not just possible, it's extremely likely that would be an outcome of Biden presidency. So it's not, and people get that. Like, people can sense that. You don't have to be too deep into the policy weeds to understand. And that's certainly been reflected here at this caucus, and if it holds around the state, that's devastating, because if Biden loses the support of middle-aged and seniors, that's it.
And so, Ryan, you did the seminal piece on the Sanders organizational machine. Are you seeing the dividends of that really pay off? Or like many of the Sanders people that you've spoken to, did they end up coming there via that volunteer army that you described in that piece?
Well, they said they don't know exactly what was behind it, but a lot of them were contacted by somebody, text message, door knocker. There's a pastor here who came out for Bernie and brought a lot of people out for Bernie, and I asked him why, and he said, because Bernie showed up in my neighborhood. Bernie talked to me. That's it? Bernie talked to me. And the Biden people that I talked with are also quite sympathetic towards Bernie. A number of them said that he would be Biden, so many Bs, that Bernie would be their second choice, if Biden turned out not be viable. So there isn't any kind of toxic rivalry between the supporters here.
Which is so interesting because it's so different than the media narrative, but it's something we talk about here all the time.
Second choice.
If you look at the second choice for Sanders supporters, it's Elizabeth Warren, but if you look at the second choice for Biden supporters, it's often Bernie Sanders. So those ideological lanes don't always work out the way that the pundits think that they might. Last question here for you, Ryan. Where else are you headed tonight, and what are you going to be watching for as the results unfold?
Well, so when this is over, this will be it. There really isn't time to get to another caucus, because if you're not inside the doors by 7 o'clock, they won't let you in. So from here, we'll go to the Bernie, what they're calling a victory party. I'm not going to jinx it for them by calling it that. I don't know how long the show's going. Happy to dial in from there if you're still on the air. We thought about stopping by the Biden one on the way, but I think we're gonna skip that and just head straight to Sanders, and then tomorrow heading to New Hampshire.
There we go. Seems
on
like a
to
safe
New
bet.
Hampshire.
Thank you,
Ryan. We missed you, but we're
soon.
so glad to have your report on the ground. Thank you so much, and we will try to check in with you later. So thank you for that.
Great. See you guys soon.
Thanks, Ryan.
All right, we've got a lot more to talk about tonight as the results continue to roll in from around Iowa. Luckily, we've got even more of our friends to help us break it down.
Joining us now, Democratic strategist Michael Starr Hopkins and journalist Zed Jelani. Welcome to you both. All-star, absolute all-star panel here, guys. So you're probably more in touch with information with us. We've been sitting now up here for a little bit while, a little bit by. So what are you guys seeing? What are you looking for right now? What are some indicators that are jumping out at you, Michael?
So I'm hearing in college towns and kind of urban areas, Sanders supporters are overperforming, and we're seeing that the Biden people, the Biden camp, they're not reaching viability in a lot of spots, and it looks like those numbers that weren't previously reported from the Des Moines Register poll are being fortuitous. It looks really like he is struggling.
What do you think, Zed?
Well, I think we do have to bear in mind that a lot of the media is focused on urban districts because they're larger crowds, they look better on television, are easier to kind of survey.
True.
Good point. Biden may be trying to run up the score elsewhere. Although we should note that I think Buttigieg has historically been fairly strong in Western Iowa.
Right.
So that may actually foretell that Biden is going to come out of this looking pretty weak, which I think the Bloomberg effect is going to kind of be in favor there.
Look, I'm telling you. So I'm looking at updated entrance poll data from Nate Silver. It says Sanders 22, Buttigieg 22, Biden 17, Warren 15, Klobuchar 11. So Biden actually doing a little bit better than Warren. Pete Buttigieg having a pretty phenomenal night if that continues to hold. Of course, these are very, very early numbers, but also this is an interesting one. I think this is a good indicator for Bernie Sanders. Now, this is from the Washington Post. About 6 in 10 Democratic Iowa caucus goers say that they support replacing all private health care with a single government plan for everybody. To me, that indicates strong support for Sanders if that's 6 out of 10 Democratic caucus goers, Michael.
Yeah, I mean, that has been the essence of Sanders' argument for health care, and it kind of chips away at Elizabeth Warren and especially Joe Biden in the conversation about kind of where we're going to go with health care. I think it is really interesting to see, if you look at Mayor Pete, like you were saying, a lot of his support has come from Western Iowa. It's come from kind of urban college towns. We're not seeing that kind of turnout in terms of Biden in Western. We're not seeing it in terms of colleges. We're going to start running out of places where he's going to be able to get that support.
Yeah. I mean, there was a snowbird caucus down in Florida, and Klobuchar dominated. You think that'd be a good spot for Biden? And again, look, all of this is anecdotal. We're trying to draw what conclusions we can, but said that healthcare information is really interesting because Sanders was basically the only candidate who stood firmly with Medicare for all and didn't get waved off of it by their donors or the focus groups or the, Rahm Emanuel going on TV and saying this is a disaster, et cetera, et cetera. It's ended up being a really key differentiator for him. I mean, if you look at poll after poll, no matter what state you're in, voters always say they trust Bernie Sanders most on healthcare, and they also say that healthcare is their number one issue. So I think that has ended up being really a key to this whole race.
Yeah, it was interesting. I think at some of the actual caucus events, they were actually chanting Medicare for All on the Bernie side, which is that I think they were branding their candidate around this issue because, as you've noticed, in poll after poll, Sanders generally outpolls the other candidates in terms of who they trust on health care. I mean, I think in some ways, he's kind of won that argument. The question is whether he can take that issue and raise the relevance of it high enough to where voters are willing to take the leap with him rather than let's say, a Biden or a Buttigieg or a Bloomberg or Warren.
Right. So I believe we have some preliminary information on Pete Buttigieg from the first alignment. Let's take a look at that number. So we got 22%, I think, of precincts that are reporting.
That's 22% is his number with 1% reporting.
1% reporting.
Very, very early. But these are very good numbers for him if these were to hold. Again, we don't know where these numbers are coming from, so don't draw too many conclusions from this, 1% in, et cetera, et cetera. We also have numbers for Bernie Sanders here. Looks quite similar, 21%. Again, 1% reporting, so very close between the two of them, but a million caveats here. Early. We don't know where those results are coming in from, and you have still many, many caucus sites still out that we don't have results for. What do you think, Zed, of Warren's performance tonight, and what do you think she needs to do in order to sort of have a viable shot at ultimately becoming the nominee?
Well, I think that her kind of last-minute campaign pitch was around unity. I think she had a television commercial where she was introducing former Sanders and former Clinton supporters, both saying, hey, we're behind Warren now. And I think that's kind of what she's trying to do, is be the Goldilocks candidate, which is saying, hey, this is too hot, this is too cold, this is just right. In terms of the Iowa caucus, I think this should be really her time to shine. I don't think it gets actually easier from her here on out because her base generally is more homogenous in terms of the demographics. So I think she really needs to pull off a top two finish here.
We can throw up her numbers here too. Again, early 1% in, but we can take a look at where she is on that first alignment. Actually, we're 2% reporting now.
2%.
18%, so right behind Sanders and right behind Pete there, hanging in there. But I think, Michael, that Zed is right. She really needs to at least get second here to prove that she could be the alternative to Sanders, because that's going to be the question coming out of here. Who are the sort of more moderate, more establishment types going to coalesce around? If she wants to make the case that that's her, she's got to come in second here.
So I think she can afford to come in third, but I think the only reason she can do that is because there's a big argument that she and Sanders are sitting on a lot of the same voters. And I think that the problem is going to end up being the turnout issue. If we end up having 300,000 plus people turn out, then Sanders is going to win by a landslide. landslide, and it's going to show that a lot of the Warren people have moved over to Sanders. If we have less than 300,000, then I think that there's going to be more of an argument that she may do better in New Hampshire, that there may be a longer path for her to get there. But I think if Sanders ends up overperforming, then
she's over and over again tried to kind of make that media narrative, but it's just not the case, right? They don't sit on the same voters. Biden and Bernie have much more overlap than Warren has much more overlap with Pete. And I mean, look, Krystal, if we're looking at this, let's say Buttigieg does come in second. Let's say he comes in right behind Bernie Sanders. I actually think that's probably almost a best case scenario for Bernie, right? Because there's no way, Zed, that Buttigieg is going to compete in South Carolina. And so if he comes in second in Iowa, that actually makes him competitive in New Hampshire, but then he's got no future map from that point forward, and Bernie really is doing well. And then, as the secret giant that I exposed this morning, Bloomberg is just sitting there, waiting in the wings, ready to jump in.
There's this meme of Jason Momoa sneaking up on Henry Cavill, Aquaman and Superman, and basically Bloomberg is Momoa's character here in that he is sneaking up on this race, and that I think he's looking for a weak Biden to jump in and tell the Democratic establishment, hey, I'll be the new Biden, because Biden's not cutting it. And I think if Biden does come in that third place, that fourth place, I think that'll make a really, really strong argument for Bloomberg to really ramp up as the establishment candidate against the Sanders, because as you said, Buttigieg doesn't really have much of a path outside the first couple states. I mean, it's just really hard to see him gathering the diversity of support that someone like a Sanders could gather.
I mean, I think they have magical thinking at this point, because we just saw a new South Carolina poll come out that had Biden really falling. I mean, this is a poll that he at one point led by 31 points. Now he only leads by Sanders by 5, with Tom Steyer right there nipping at Sanders' heels in third place. But Pete Buttigieg, still after all this time, sits at 3% with black voters. So his story has always been, well, once they get to know me, then they will come over. We just haven't seen that to be the case. So I think his campaign's theory of the case is like Obama 2008. If we do well in Iowa, if we do well in New Hampshire, then it's going to flip a switch. But I don't see any indications that there's actually is a latent desire for Pete, that people are just like waiting for permission to move over, Michael, to the Pete camp.
I mean, I don't know. I got to say, I think if Pete ends up coming in second place to Sanders, I think that's a big win for Pete. And I think it poses a problem for Sanders because Pete poses that kind of generational change in that he's young. He actually does have an inspirational stump speech in the way that Biden doesn't, in the way that Warren hasn't really been able to connect.
He does do well with boomer voters, too.
He does not, but he does dismally with young voters.
That's what the real issue is.
He does, but I think at the end of the day, the more he goes to college campuses, the more he interacts with people. I think the closer we get through the primary process, the more young people will relate to him.
What do you think, Seth? Because, I mean, I agree with Saagar's analysis that Pete in second is kind of a best-case scenario for Bernie because, look, you got to be able to win over voters of color at the end of the day, and he doesn't have support with the black community. He has very little support with the Latino community. So I think it's hard for him to have a real path, and if he's hanging out there, he's going to stay in, Biden's going to stay in, Bloomberg waiting in the wings. I think that would be a favorable path for Sanders to win the nomination.
I mean, it very well could. I think the big kind of the big question hanging out over all this is what happens to kind of Biden's hegemonic support, let's say like in the American South. Every state in the American South, Biden has a substantial lead. And I think...
Although that seems to be slipping.
Well, I think it could be slipping in some areas, but I mean, if you look at like the latest Florida polls, like Biden is way up beyond anyone. And I think,
Florida's a little special, though.
The real question to me is, how do we see the interaction of Michael Bloomberg spending $270 million in these Super Tuesday states exclusively? Do some of those Biden people start shifting to Bloomberg, saying Biden just doesn't have it? We need to go to Bloomberg.
I mean, that's where I really think this is all coming down. This is why I think it will be this epic kind of Bernie-Bloomberg matchup. And look, again, this is anecdotal generally, but Jonathan Martin in the New York Times reporting here, Biden is not viable in a Davenport precinct where they dispatched the Atlanta mayor, right? Like his big-time surrogates were dispatched out there. Jeff Zeleny is saying the exact same thing in Des Moines, Iowa, famous Polk County, right?
And you're looking at
Hillary Clinton.
These are the Biden numbers on first alignment, 16%. Again, this is only 2% reporting, so very, very thin in terms of results. But it shows him right at that viability threshold. So
every
barely over
reporter,
or barely under.
Every political reporter has some different story from a different precinct of where Biden is supposed to be doing well and he's not even viable, Michael.
I mean, if Biden, if he manages to come in third or fourth, I think the bottom falls out of it because one, you end up in a fundraising problem, but two, there becomes an image problem because people know that Bloomberg has the money, he's willing to spend the money, they know he's the emergency valve, but also they know that there are other candidates. If Pete comes in second, that there are other options. And so now it becomes, well, Biden doesn't really seem up to it. The voters don't really want him there. And so now it just becomes, we're looking towards another candidate. And that's how you go from 20 to 15 to single digits, and that ends a campaign.
Well, and Zed, you can't be the electability guy if you can't win an election.
Absolutely.
I mean, that's the bottom
especially
line
in a
here.
white state like Iowa.
That is the most.
And I think Michael is correct too to point to the fundraising, which has always been a weak spot. You know, he's supposed to be the front runner, but he doesn't have the front runner dollars to go with it. He's got to be scraping the bottom of the barrel here, already rolling into Iowa, hoping for a bounce so he can get his funders to come in for him. But if he doesn't do well here, I think Michael's right. They're going to sit on their hands and say, you know, let's see what happens with Pete. Let's see what happens with Michael Bloomberg, who's got $1 gazillion to spend.
I mean, I think that's absolutely right. I mean, this was Biden's kind of worst case scenario was he had to get through these early couple states. He had to get through Iowa and he had to get through New Hampshire and say that, hey, this socialist didn't knock me off. You know, Elizabeth Warren didn't knock me off. This mayor of a town of 7,000 people didn't knock me off, right? And if all that starts happening, he, you know, by the time he gets to South Carolina, he may get a small victory there and say, hey, I have that. But the rest of Super Tuesday is going to be looking at it like, hey, this isn't the guy anymore.
And this is all about money. He's got $9 million cash on hand, fourth most amount in the entire campaign by the top tier people. How is he going to be able to replenish that campaign chest? He was flowing a lot of money into Iowa in the early days, really trying to plug this stopgap, Michael. And it's really, I mean, it just generally does not
Think about Super Tuesday.
Working.
You got Texas, California, Florida, all states that are insanely expensive to compete in.
Yeah.
If he, you know, has $9 million on hand now, he's not getting a boon of fundraising because of his results tonight. I don't know how he manages to compete on Super Tuesday.
Well, and let's
how does
not
the
forget,
super PAC even
California ballots go out today.
Yeah.
So voting there has effectively started.
Absolutely.
Which means that the momentum, whatever happens here tonight, is incredibly important. It also seems like, you know, we're just getting early indications, but it doesn't seem like there's any clear patterns to the realignments that would really favor one candidate over another. If you had to say maybe Pete is benefiting most from the realignments, which would make some sense. But so far, none of the indications there have been particularly overwhelming, Zed.
No, I don't think so. I think maybe you'll see some of the more Yang folks who tend to be younger going to Sanders. But the rest, I think, is kind of a grab bag. I mean, I think that Buttigieg's position in this race in particular has been so strong with the kind of the older voters, a lot of the boomers, to where he's cut into what theoretically should be a Biden lane, which should be a Klobuchar lane. But those alignments can go the other way when Buttigieg is not viable in a particular part of Iowa. So I think, that part of it is very unpredictable.
Seth, you always are so great at looking at the policy and the pitches that these candidates are making. Based on the surge that we've seen in the polls for Sanders and judging by the early indications, what do you think it was that he did in these closing weeks that really seemed to come together for him?
Well, part of it is usually in elections like this, it's really the last couple of weeks a lot of people decide. So I think a lot of people were not even probably taking him seriously.
It was 33% reading CNN that I saw.
Right. I was going to say the exit poll tonight.
Huge number.
So I think
in the last 24 hours.
Have ticked
2%.
up a bit with 2% in now, 23%.
Right.
I think Sanders has a very simple pitch that reaches a lot of people. I think it does have a problem reaching that older voter set. I think NBC's entrance poll had something like 4% of people over 65 are with Sanders, and that's very, very low, and that's something he would have to boost if he wants to win.
Certainly.
But I think that very simple message appeals to a lot of people who don't really have a nest egg, who do not necessarily have a lot of money, and also have not been through a generation of kind of demonization and Red Scare type. You know, socialism is this, you're going to be McGovern, Nixon, et cetera, et cetera. Right. I think to a lot of those people, it's just a very simple message that they're very receptive to. And I think that a lot of people just were not waking up and reading that message. I mean, if anyone's ever worked any campaigns or volunteered, even canvassed, you'll notice how many people are just undecided until the very last moment. And I think a lot of people woke up and saw Sanders, and that gave him an edge that, he may just take Iowa with.
So let me ask this question. I was just looking at Nate Cohn, who says, it looks like Sanders has a margin in the early, the first realignment, but the realignment seemed to be favoring Buttigieg a bit, as we were just discussing. What does a Pete #1, Bernie #2, Michael look like? What does that look like going forward?
I mean, that changes the whole dynamic of the race. I mean, I think for Sanders, it doesn't really change much. But for Buttigieg, I mean, that puts him in a whole new category in terms of fundraising, in terms of viability for Nevada, for New Hampshire, for Super Tuesday. I think people now look at him like a real candidate and not something that people are kind of testing out. I will say, we talked about this a couple weeks ago. I've been very critical of Sanders for the last couple of years. But one of the things that I think he has done very well is identify the problem that's going on in our country, whether it be income inequality, whether it be the unfairness in our electoral system. And I don't necessarily agree with how he is going about fixing those problems, but he's been very clear in diagnosing them. And I think that that's something that
and we have the New Hampshire numbers. That's graphic G for Control Room to put up when you can. It shows Sanders there with a pretty hefty lead. Makes sense. He won it last time, and he's a neighboring senator there in Vermont. Biden in number 2, and this is where the path is tough for Pete, because even though, look, I think I could see him coming up in the polls here. This is another pretty white state. At the moment, he sits in 4th place. But beyond that, the national polls have him way down, and Bloomberg beating him now. He's really fallen off since Bloomberg has come in the race. So even if he wins in Iowa, I don't see a path for him.
Well, part of it is I think he may have to alter his strategy somewhat. I think in Iowa he was kind of presenting himself as sort of a younger, slightly more progressive Joe Biden, which may work out for him considering how much he had dominance in that western Iowa section. Sanders, I think, focused very much on kind of college towns and cities and so on and so forth. They also did targeted Latino outreach, other things. I think that the challenge for both of them at that point becomes diversifying their kind of hardcore base, and part of that would be, is Pete Buttigieg willing to be more populist and actually go off against somebody like Michael Bloomberg? Is Bernie Sanders willing to kind of maybe not change what he believes, but maybe how he says it to kind of an older voter set that would kind of expand the base and take on someone like Michael Bloomberg? So I think both candidates would kind of, they're going to enter very different playing fields soon, because I think the Iowa map was very, very specific to Iowa, and I think their strategies were very specific to having that kind of crowded field and getting the specific regions of the state.
That's right. So this is a real-time focus group, right? Ultimately. I mean, we are seeing some interesting things. So I want to point out that Chuck Rocha has been on the show many times. We've talked a lot about heavily targeting the Latino vote. It seems to be working. There was a caucus site that I'm looking at here in which out of 185 voters, all mostly Latino caucus site, Bernie Sanders won 94% of the vote. That's an absolutely stunning number there. But to Krystal's point about what if Pete Buttigieg does come away with this thing. So very, 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 very early preliminary data is showing that Pete Buttigieg is doing pretty well, around 20%. I think it's like 2%. But I mean, these are general trends we can look at and say, hey, Pete is doing well. To me, Michael, it seems almost like he would be a Marco Rubio of this cycle, which is that, we should remember that Ted Cruz won the Iowa caucuses over Donald Trump. Marco Rubio was the so-called comeback kid, but ultimately the further map for Marco, it didn't exist. It just didn't. Same, and Ted Cruz as well in South Carolina and some of these other states. And so the media, I think, will try and crown. I mean, if Pete Buttigieg wins the Iowa caucuses,
he will be compared to Obama.
It will be Obama level. I mean, it will just be absolutely insane, the amount of media freakout that comes on that. But if Sanders, let's say he comes in second by 2%, you can't sleep on that 2% because, as Krystal's talking about, he's up by 8 in New Hampshire. Pete Buttigieg is down at 13. Now, look, you're going to get a little bit of a bump out of that. But still, Elizabeth Warren is a neighboring senator. I think it really does. I still think it actually helps Bernie. I think Pete winning doesn't change the map all that much.
I don't think it changes the dynamic all that much, to be honest with you. It just keeps more people in the race longer.
I think it does a couple things. I think one, if Pete ends up winning or coming in second, I think either one is considered a win for him.
Yes,
I think he automatically gets another look by the African American community. I think people who kind of wrote him off because of the headlines and because of things they'd heard will now be forced to go back and look at him again, listen to some speeches. And I think the media will play a big part in that. And I think also his big thing is going to be he doesn't have the senatorial record that Rubio or Ted Cruz had, and so him being a mayor may actually benefit him because his voting record, he doesn't have that kind of history that other people have.
Right. What do you think, Zed? What do you think of all that?
Look, I think the worst case scenario for someone like a Sanders would have been Biden winning. It would have been the worst case scenario for almost everyone.
Almost everyone in the race. I think that would have been the ball game.
So any other scenario but that, I think, keeps this ball going because we don't really have a clear path for anyone else out there. I mean, had Biden win, he would have swept the whole thing. Anyone else wins, it just keeps going. But we should note that I think something like 7 out of the past 10 winners of the Iowa caucus did go on to win the presidency. And this is the kind of historical path that I'm sure Buttigieg would invoke should he win Iowa.
Of course. course.
right.
Yeah, and we've been saying here on the show, no candidate in the modern era has won both Iowa and New Hampshire and failed to win the nomination. So that history is large as well. If we can put back up the final realignment numbers that we have, again, this is very early. This is 1.3%, according to my numbers, reporting so far. But the person I wanted to talk about that we haven't really discussed yet is Amy Klobuchar, who is right there, nipping at the heels of Elizabeth Warren in 5th place. It looks that at this point that the New York Times endorsement did help her. The local Iowa endorsements she got did help her. But look, if you come out of Iowa in 5th place, it's not really gonna help you any. Do you think that she stays in the race if the results stand as is?
I mean, she may stay. She may stay. I think there's a number of candidates who go through the South Carolina or go up to Super Tuesday.
Yeah.
And then at that point, they end up dropping out. It kind of depends on what kind of media coverage they get. Also, communications with other campaigns. Apparently, the Biden campaign was talking to Klobuchar over the past week, trying to create some kind of deal for realignment. But I don't think a 5th place or even a 4th place would not put Klobuchar in a position where she has a map the same way that Buttigieg would hope that he has a map and everyone else to win.
Yeah, indeed. All right, guys. Thank you so much for your analysis. We appreciate it. Great to have you guys. Next up, we spoke with the nation's national affairs correspondent, John Nichols, about what he is seeing on the ground at one of the caucus sites in Dubuque, Iowa. National affairs correspondent for The Nation, John Nichols, has been following the candidates over the last several months of campaigning through the Hawkeye State.
He joins us now via Skype from one of the caucus sites in Dubuque, Iowa. John, welcome to the show. How are you doing? Tell us what you're seeing there on the ground.
I'm in Dubuque, Precinct 9A. Dubuque is a working-class union town along the Mississippi River. This precinct is a mix of working-class neighborhoods, and it's a college. There's Loras College, which is up here. And they had 230 people showed up. The threshold was 35 to start to get precinct delegates. And the Bernie Sanders people had 78 folks.
Wow.
They were overwhelmingly the biggest. Sanders, Pete Buttigieg, Elizabeth Warren all made viability. Joe Biden, who many people thought would have his base of strength in towns like Dubuque, did not make the threshold.
Wow.
That's pretty astounding, John. I mean, we have our computers here in front of us. We're hearing very early reports of Biden not showing viability in many of these places where he's supposed to be having strength. Or is that generally match what you're seeing there in that caucus room?
I'm shocked, to be honest. And I know this town. I don't know it. I don't claim to be an expert, but I've reported on caucuses for years. I come here because I want to get a feel for what a traditional union town, a traditional reasonably democratic town would do. And I would have told you that Biden would have done well here. Not perfectly, but at least he would have done well. That's just not the case. Without a doubt, you could see it even early on. The Sanders people came early. They were very young. This is a real youthful group of people, and also a real working class group of people. The bottom line is that this idea that Bernie Sanders has offered, this notion of mobilizing and bringing new people, there's simply no question that it happened here.
And John, who seems to have the sort of second or third strongest support after Sanders, who you say has a clear edge there in the caucus site?
It's very interesting. Elizabeth Warren, she is the second largest in number. Sanders had 78. Elizabeth Warren had 40. And then the Buttigieg folks were just behind at like 39. Andrew Yang, interestingly enough, only had 3 fewer people than Joe Biden.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, that
doesn't surprise us based on some of the reporting we've done here. And also, he's running a campaign very similar to Sanders in that his whole theory is bringing in people who have not been involved in the process. So it makes sense he wouldn't show up in the poll as much as he probably has support in areas like the one you're at.
Exactly. And so now what's happening at this caucus is that the supporters of the candidates who are viable are giving speeches to the whole group, and they're also working the different corners trying to win them over. This is where this caucus here is especially interesting to me, because there is a substantial number of Yang backers. If they go over with Sanders, you're going to get Sanders getting pretty close to half the caucus.
Yeah, and John, I'm looking at the map in front of me. Dubuque actually is a region where has always voted for the overall winner of the caucuses, and it went for Hillary Clinton by a pretty substantial margin. So if what you're seeing there is indicative of the entire state, then we very much could see a Bernie victory tonight.
I'm going to be very cautious with you because I am in one precinct. The door is locked, so I can't tell you what's going on in other places. But I can tell you that as somebody who's covered a lot of caucuses, just the reality of the number of people who showed up here, if this sort of thing is being repeated in places like Dubuque across Iowa, this is what nobody talks about Dubuque the way they talk about Iowa City or Ames, the college towns, or Grinnell. Dubuque is, it has colleges. There's a college here, but this is also a working class town. And the fact is, if Bernie Sanders is getting these kinds of numbers in places like this, he's in a very good position.
Yeah.
And Sean, do you know what the turnout was there back in 2016? Have they surpassed those numbers? And then also, we've heard a lot about potential Amy Klobuchar momentum coming into tonight. How is she faring at that particular caucus site?
Sure. Good questions, both. I think from what I understand, the turnout was about the same as last time, and not a huge bump, but roughly similar. As regards Amy Klobuchar, she did not reach viability here, and frankly, I think her group was smaller than the Yang group, for instance. She had a corner of folks, probably about 20 folks, but definitely fell short.
And so, John, you said you spoke to some of those Sanders voters.
I did.
Yeah, so tell us the characteristic. Are they young or disproportionately older? What's the demographic makeup of everybody that we're seeing there?
Okay. The Sanders supporters are really, really young. There are a lot of 18-year-olds, 19-year-olds. They're savvy. They know their way around. The guy who is speaking for Sanders behind me right now is, early 20s. He's totally on top of the issues. He's doing a good job of making his case. Now, over with the Biden folks, as an example, I would say the Biden folks, you had a lot of people over 65. The interesting one is the Buttigieg folks. I would say that the Buttigieg folks are, and they did reach viability here. The Buttigieg folks are, people in their 30s, late 30s and 40s, young, professional, fitting some of the demographics that people talk about with Buttigieg. The Warren group is overwhelmingly women and relatively younger women. Yeah.
Well, that makes sense given her pitch in the final weeks here. John, text us and let us know what happens with those Yang people. We want to know how they realign.
Let us know,
John. Stuff. Thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
It's a pleasure. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely.
Of course. All right, and we did speak with John. That was a few minutes ago that we did that interview, and we did get an update that the Yang people moved en masse to Bernie Sanders. So there you go.
There you go.
There's that update. We do have some new numbers that we want to show you. If we can throw the Bernie Sanders numbers up. This is upon first alignment. Okay, so 2% reporting very early, and this is first alignment before those realignments happen. He's at 25%. We've also got numbers for Warren in, again, on first alignment. Down at 21%, 4 points behind Bernie Sanders. Again, only 2% reporting, so very, very early, Saagar.
Yeah, it is. So I'm looking at the New York Times here. It says 33% chance that Sanders is going to win. Still has a 28 for Joe Biden. Of course, anecdotal kind of evidence that we're seeing all across from political embeds across Iowa are saying that Biden not showing viability, doesn't seem to be showing up. Generally, Pete Buttigieg seemingly having a very good night.
Yep.
Defying expectations. We've been talking a lot about here about how that might change the game. So it's really interesting.
Yeah, indeed. It seems at this point, early in the night, as it is with the little bits of anecdotal and real numbers that we have coming in, seems like Pete and Bernie are having the best night so far. There are 615,000 registered Democrats on Iowa's voter rolls, but only half, optimistically, we're expected to participate in today's nominating contest.
That's right. So here to help us talk about the results so far, it's our amazing, amazing panel. Democratic strategist Andrew Feldman, Rachel Bovard, Senior Director of Policy at the Conservative Partnership Institute, and, of course, Maximilian Alvarez, who's host of the Working People podcast. Legit all-star panel here.
Indeed.
So happy to have you guys. Rachel, what are you seeing? I mean, early results in that are coming. Generally, it seems to be the story of the night is that the working class communities, the ones traditionally supported Hillary Clinton, thought maybe go to Biden. It's just not happening.
It's not happening. And I think this is the enthusiasm election, right? This is about authenticity and enthusiasm.
Right.
Although I will say, this Pete Buttigieg sort of surprise that we're seeing is not totally unexpected if you consider that he spent $7 million in ads in Iowa. I mean, he put all of his chips in here. So if he didn't have a good showing, I mean, that was going to be the end.
Yes.
But, I will say, Pete Buttigieg, it's not a total go from now if he wins Iowa. I mean, remember in 2012, right? Who won Iowa for the Republicans? Rick Santorum.
Yeah,
okay,
that's right.
Let's remember, it's
and
not
Mike Huckabee won it before that.
Yeah,
so,
it's not a clear glide, but he is doing decently well because he put a ton of money into the state.
Well, and to your point, Rachel, and I'll pass this off to Andrew here. I just pulled up the Real Clear Politics national polling average, and it is a very different story than Iowa, right? Nationally, Pete is down in 5th place at 6.5% of the vote. Bloomberg has really cut into him nationally. Of course, Bloomberg not playing in Iowa. So he is having a good night tonight. I think whether he gets first or second, look, it's early. He could end up anywhere in that lineup. But so far, it looks like Pete is having a strong night. Does that create a path forward for him or not?
Look, it's too early to tell. But the big question out of Iowa is not how many delegates you win, because there really aren't that many at stake, but it is about what's the media narrative coming out of this, right? Sure. What's the boom? My question has always been, if Biden ends up in 3rd or 4th place, which in these very early numbers seems like it could be a possibility, is he able to hold on in Super Tuesday states in South Carolina where he says he has a firewall? Pete Buttigieg, I think he really needs no less than 2nd place tonight. I'm not guaranteeing that that's going to happen, to be honest with you. If it does, that's good for Pete Buttigieg. He'll move on. But I'm still not convinced that he's going to be able to move minority voters in the upcoming states. If he does, it's a whole new ballgame for him. If he doesn't, it's game over.
I just don't see it. I mean, that's what we were talking about with the previous panel, is we were saying, I mean, even if Pete were to win Iowa, right? I mean, he might be able to win New Hampshire. We have the New Hampshire numbers. He's still at 4th place. They're currently in the Real Clear Politics polling average. And then generally, Max, he has no track record with people of color whatsoever. The more and more they've gotten to know him, I think he's got, 3%?
3%
Krystal,
in South Carolina.
In South Carolina with black voters. It's just not a realistic match.
As Andrew Yang and Tulsi Gabbard.
Right.
Hey, it doesn't have no track record.
Right, yeah.
Right. I mean, POC aren't having any Pete Buttigieg.
No,
and I mean,
not.
I think that, because we are right to have a lot of skepticism, not just of Pete Buttigieg, but of any candidate, right? I mean, and I think that this really speaks to one of the most representative images of today's news, which was the meatpacking plant workers in Ottumwa, many of whom are Ethiopian immigrants, right? These workers are mostly on the 2nd shift, so they're working from 2 p.m. to midnight, which means that a Bernie Sanders organizer had to stand outside of that plant
at
from
1 a.m. in the morning.
Right, from midnight to 3 a.m. every night for a week. I think that is how you show people that you are actually serious about bringing them into a political movement, not just paying kind of lame lip service to the fact that your second uncle's best friend was in the Teamsters or something like that, right? You actually show up and say, I care about you. I want to come where you are. I want to win your vote over with more than just kind of empty platitudes. And I think that Buttigieg has not done that.
I mean, Max, the media, we all know, is going to be in love with Pete tomorrow morning. I mean, there's no doubt about that. I'm sure they're
Even
already.
if he could get 3rd and he would be like, it's the comeback kid. I've been calling it Marco Mentum, Rachel.
I mean, the interesting thing to me is that we've been thinking that it was going to come out of Iowa and it was going to be this Bernie-Biden clash, right? I did a piece on the clash of generations because they do both have this base of working class support. And the primary dividing line between them has been generational. If it's Bernie and Pete coming out tomorrow, that looks much more like a class battle. The dividing lines are a number of them. It is still generational. Bernie disproportionately outperforms with younger folks. Pete does better on the older end of the spectrum. But the sharpest dividing line is likely to be class and education level. Pete's strongest backers have been, higher ed having.
Yeah, I mean, I've been saying this for a long time. I think a lot of people have been saying it for a long time, including you on the show, right? I mean, it's just, people aren't dumb. Right, they can see that everything in Buttigieg's career has been like methodically and painstakingly set up for this moment. Yeah. Right, there is like you can't fake authenticity, and when every like achievement in one person's life feels like a photo op, just so that you can move on to the next one, and then when you start asking questions, and he gets very enraged, like when the New York Times pressed him on the Canadian bread price fixing scandal, right? You see that rage in his eyes. And I do think that like I said, it's not that he doesn't have like no track record. I think that he has a very nice sheen of manicured appearance that he wants to present. Well, and as soon as you start pressing him on that, you see what he's really about.
Really short-circuited on that. Rachel, I'll get you in there 1 second. I want to give a quick update. With 32% of the 1,700 precincts reporting now, we have 25% Bernie Sanders.
No, you have 32 of those. 1.8%.
1.8% of the vote that I'm giving you here. 32%. So it has 25% for Bernie Sanders, 20% for Elizabeth Warren, 18% for Pete Buttigieg. Do with that information what you will. I know what you wanted to. I just wanted to give
the last thing I want to say about Pete Buttigieg, kind of to tie up this discussion a little bit, is that despite whatever the media narrative is tomorrow, I think Pete Buttigieg has two fatal flaws that means he is an unsustainable candidate. And one of those is his performance with people of color. He cannot win the general without that backing, and I think it is not with him. He's trying so hard, and it's just not with him.
Yeah.
But the second thing is that he seems to have never learned this very fundamental rule of politics, which is that you don't insult the voters. Right. You do not talk down to the voters. And he is a perennial, constant violator of this rule. The way that he finger wags, not even just at Democrats, but across the aisle. Like if you're a Republican Christian, you have been insulted by Pete Buttigieg at every possible opportunity. He needs those people to win, and all he does is lecture them. Elizabeth Warren makes the same mistake. Bernie Sanders doesn't.
He doesn't.
And I think that has propelled him a lot in this. Joe Biden doesn't as well because he's a seasoned politician and he knows better.
That's what explains both of their support with actual working class voters. Andrew, I want to get your insight into the amount of money that Rachel had talked about earlier. Buttigieg basically carpet bombed Iowa in TV ads from the very beginning. Huge amounts of TV spend. I actually saw some speculation as to why Pete Buttigieg as to why the other campaigns basically seeded Pete Buttigieg the final weeks of the campaign in that TV ad spend. Do you think it made that much of a difference here to see some of the disproportionate results that we're seeing? What do you think?
No, I mean, I think that he spent $7 million. Look, I think it really does help Pete Buttigieg in terms of him getting to the point where he is. But I don't think it tremendously hurt an Elizabeth Warren or some of the other folks because look, Pete really had to convince voters to actually pull the trigger on a 38-year-old mayor of a 100,000 person city. But the point is, I think that, look, what we're also seeing, remember, Pete Buttigieg aired straight up ads against Medicare for All, right? Straight up, alongside other third-party groups. And we're seeing tonight, with millions of dollars ad spent against Medicare for All, Democrats are saying 60% that they support it. That's not a good thing for Pete Buttigieg or a Klobuchar or even a Biden who said this is not the way to go. So I'm not so sure that this is going to be the greatest night for Pete Buttigieg. Look, if he gets second or third place, he lives another day. But you're reading the numbers. I'm not sure that Warren's going to lose second place.
I'm not sure either. Everything right now is so. I want to float the idea here. This is really dramatic. So I'm seeing Sean Trendy's very respected political analyst saying it is very, very possible here that Sanders could win the first alignment, Warren could win the second, and then Buttigieg could get the most number of delegates. So a complete mess. Who the hell wins Iowa if that's the case? I mean,
this is the kind of chaos I am here for.
That is the case. I'm like, hey, listen, we'll be here all night breaking that one down.
Listen,
because
you know what benefits? Well, first of all, if Biden is going to end up in fourth and not be any of those winners, the best possible thing he could hope for is for it to be kind of a mess, where there's no coalescing around one alternative.
I think that's right.
That's number one. The other person that benefits is Bernie Sanders, because as long as the vote is being split between a number of other establishment candidates, he holds on to his advantage, Rachel. So if it did end up being that kind of a muddle and everybody can kind of claim victory, then I think Sanders is still in a very good position here going forward, especially if Biden does end up sort of looking like he's crumbling and collapsing.
Yeah, I think the flip side of what you said about Biden is also true, right? He could benefit from this chaos, but he has a ton to lose. And I think the postscript of potentially him tanking in Iowa is that we finally see Joe Biden unmasked, right? This name ID, this sort of expectation, kind of goes to what you've been saying. Like, he doesn't have the financing, he doesn't have the enthusiasm, and people are finally starting to wake up to say, well, maybe not. And so this could be the death knell for Joe Biden, the long, slow descent, right? And so that's something I think we could easily see if he doesn't do well in Iowa.
Yeah, well, the other person that benefits, Max, from kind of a muddle in Iowa, Mike Bloomberg. Waiting out there with $1 billion to spend, hanging out on Super Tuesday, hanging out nationwide. Look, I think this is what if he could have picked an outcome, that would be the outcome that Bloomberg would be hoping for.
Right. Yeah, I'm about to have my own Biden bleed from the eye moment. Bloomberg. Look, I said it the last time I was on this show, right? I mean, Mike Bloomberg's entire pitch, right, is to capitalize on everything that's wrong with this electoral system, right? By evading kind of real scrutiny, just carpet bombing the country with ads, just by having a lot of money. That is Mike Bloomberg's appeal. That is it, and and that he's not Bernie Sanders, right? And I think that you're right, Krystal, that this would benefit him, if it turned out to be that big of a mess. And that was kind of the narrative of this week, right? Was that I think even with Pete Buttigieg or Mike Bloomberg, you've seen the Democratic establishment throw everything, including the kitchen sink, at Bernie Sanders to see if there is some off-ramp that can put them back in charge. Because for the first time in a long time, I think the Democratic establishment does not feel like they're at the wheel, and that terrifies them.
One of the things I love that you said on the show, Max, was that Mike Bloomberg doesn't have to be bought by special interests because his wealth is itself a special interest. That having $51 billion, being the ninth richest man in the world, actually is very much a special interest in and of itself. Rachel, this is fascinating. I saw Jason Johnson, who I've called on this show a professional wrong person, was on MSNBC arguing with Nina Turner from the Sanders campaign, deriding her for calling Mike Bloomberg an oligarch. He was calling it name calling. I mean, look, we're from the right. I mean, he's the ninth richest man in the world. It's pretty easy to be like,
he owns his
he's
own
an oligarch.
media network.
He has a media company.
He bought the endorsement of all these mayors.
I was just going to say, he flat out told his own media network not to report badly on
you
him.
will not report on me. And it was just we're all like, oh,
if
okay.
If that's not an oligarch, cool. I don't know.
In any other country, if that happened, we would call it that.
Yes,
so I think we have to have the same standards.
He's actually richer than much of the Russian oligarchs.
Ones we do call.
Yeah, the Russian. Somebody, I think it was Aaron Mate pointed this out. I was saying he is richer than the Russian oligarchs who are always like, they're meddling in our democracy because they spent $1 million on whatever and paid it to a consulting firm which saw Donald Trump at a rally.
Yeah, Michael Bloomberg is meddling in our democracy.
He is. I think the American people are going to see through Michael Bloomberg here. I mean, I definitely think, look, he's going to be competitive, but if we see a Warren, if we see a Sanders, if we see someone really take momentum out of Iowa, the win may not be in the sails for a Bloomberg, no matter how much he spends on TV when it gets to Super Tuesday. It just might not happen.
Andrew, what do you think Warren needs to do tonight?
Finish in second.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I think Elizabeth Warren, because if she finishes in second, there is a strong case to be made. We have a 1-2 progressive, momentum going right now, but also Bernie Sanders was here 4 years ago. He's built up. He almost won the caucus, very, very close 4 years ago, and she worked a strategy to put organizers all across the state. She overcame real hurdles, over the last few months. So if she finishes in second and I'm the Warren campaign, I'm really excited moving into the coming weeks.
I will say this about Mike Bloomberg, though, and rule number one, which we know, don't underestimate money in politics.
Never.
I mean, this is
or Mike
baseline.
Bloomberg.
Or Mike Bloomberg.
290 something million.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But second, I do think that there is a risk, if you come out with a Bernie Sanders or an Elizabeth Warren surge out of Iowa, he's the safe choice for a lot of moderate Democrats, right? He's talking about gun violence. He's talking about, probably potentially immigration, which I think could be an Achilles heel for Sanders with moderate Democrat voters in rural America. And so I do think he poses an existential threat to that progressive wing of the party.
Michael Bloomberg supported cutting Social Security, just like Joe Biden, who is we're watching collapse, and supported, George W. Bush and John McCain, and still supports the Iraq War. So I think there's a lot that Democratic voters may hear about Michael Bloomberg if and when we get to that that point that, hasn't been said yet.
It's not going to be good for Michael Bloomberg to have to talk on the debate stage. Right. If you watch every single one of his ads, not one is Michael Bloomberg straight to camera because he literally is incoherent when he talks.
Did you see that man trying to scoop ice cream from?
That was very strange.
It is.
I did not, but I want to.
He actually has good ads. I hate to be Michael Bloomberg guy.
The ads are good.
He has good ads. He really does.
But he hasn't started talking yet. When you put him on the debate stage, when you actually start doing more a real campaign and not just an advertising campaign, I think there's a big difference.
So I do want to point out, Andrew Yang made a big push going into Iowa, did more events than any other candidate. This was a big strategic gamble from his campaign because they have a sort of natural strength in New Hampshire, where you have a lot of independents who can vote. In Iowa, it's a complicated process, which privileges people who are comfortable with that process. You have to meet the 15% viability threshold, so that's another hurdle to overcome. At this point, it doesn't look like he is vastly outperforming the polls coming in. But I just want to say, we've been seeing polls in recent days, Max, of his idea, universal basic income, what he calls the freedom dividend, and he has moved the needle on that particular issue an insane amount, and could ultimately, with the amount of support that he was able to garner in Iowa, he could ultimately be the sort of kingmaker there and determine of who actually wins the caucuses.
He could. I've been seeing people tweeting about, Yang folks going over to the Bernie side, and I think that's great.
We got that update from Dubuque, Iowa.
From Dubuque.
So anti-establishment solidarity there.
It is, and it's also solidarity in recognizing, what I just, I'm like a pull string doll. I know I say this like every time I come on, but it's recognizing the plight of the vast majority of people in this country, working people, people who, no matter how much, Trump and his team are touting low unemployment numbers, know that this booming economy is not really booming for them. They are, working people are taking out more high interest loans. They are working like multiple low wage jobs. And I think that this really kind of comes back to what I started talking about when I mentioned the Atumwa workers, largely Ethiopian immigrants. I think it's actually really, really important for Iowa especially that this was an image of, like Bernie's caucus goers, because it was in Iowa in 2008 where one of the largest single-site ICE raids in American history happened, right? And that was in Postville. And it was a significant chunk of the population. There was largely immigrants, Guatemalan, Mayan immigrants, in a town of barely over 2,000. Almost 400 people were picked up by ICE, and it devastated the town. And this is really what the stakes are, right? The stakes of bringing in a multiracial, multi-ethnic, multi-generational working class base. The stakes are everything. They are our future because, you can look at candidates who are proposing substantive, propositions to actually heal the pain of working people, or you can look at, an egomaniac who is not only touting, phantom unemployment numbers that don't really address the needs of working people, at the same time that his NLRB, the National Labor Relations Board, is a battering ram against worker protections and is destroying the people's right to organize. It's all nominal support for working people from the Trump side. It's substantive support for working people from the Bernie side and even the
We're
going to get into quite a bit of that.
We may be having that debate over the next.
I never leave here wondering what Max thinks.
I know.
I actually want to give a quick update here from the Iowa Democrats. They have a new statement out saying that they are doing quality control checks, making sure the numbers are accurate. People are still caucusing. They're working to report the results soon. That's because we did not get the results at the time that we thought we would. Just a quick update for everybody that's watching.
I don't remember this taking as long.
Yeah, I know. It's taking quite a while. But there are like 20
candidates. We want it all to be good, so go ahead, check the results.
What is this system?
That is the great question of the night. All right, our panel is going to be back in a bit. But first, the Hill's Reed Wilson is on the ground in Iowa.
That's right. He's going to join us live from Des Moines. Reed, what is the atmosphere down there like? Can you hear us, Reed?
Well, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
All right. Yes, there he is.
Cool. All right. So, we're sitting in the conference room here in the middle of downtown Des Moines. It is a hurry up and wait situation. We're told you just got the statement from the state Democratic Party. They just came and talked to me and said exactly the same thing, that they're doing these quality control checks. This is the first time that the Iowa caucuses have relied on these actual cards that people have to check the box of who they support. and the first time that they've relied on the app to get some results in. But of course, the precincts can still call in their results, which is a nice backup plan. I think that's probably what they're trying to confirm, the differences, but just sort of making sure that they've heard from all of these precincts before they start dumping numbers.
So, Reed, what are some of the other indicators that we need to be looking at? General trends on the ground that you're seeing? I mean, from what we've seen, Biden seems to be underperforming a bit in some of the areas. You're really much an expert on the geography there. Can you maybe take the viewers into what are the exact areas that we need to start looking at for who is having strength and who isn't?
Well, we don't really know yet until we actually get some real results. But
right.
A lot of the people I've been talking to around the state are telling me that Joe Biden is not viable in their particular caucuses. I've heard from a lot of people here in Des Moines itself. And if Joe Biden is falling short of viability in Polk County, Des Moines, the largest county in Iowa, well, that bodes really poorly. He'd have to have a stellar showing in the rural counties. But the rural counties are really all about organization. And who's got the best organization? It's Pete Buttigieg, Elizabeth Warren, Bernie Sanders. I would expect that those three are doing pretty well. Bernie Sanders looked as if he was leading, and as the sort of final result, or final poll numbers came in. But I wouldn't sleep on Pete Buttigieg. I've had a couple of top Democratic sources tell me that he is having a better night than people think.
That's generally what we seem to be hearing as well.
Yeah, I mean, early as it is, and with the little bit of numbers that we have, anecdotally, that does look like what is unfolding right now. I mean, Reed, if Pete does get a win here, I was looking at the Real Clear Politics New Hampshire average. He's in 4th. The national average, he's in 5th now, behind Bloomberg. I believe he's at 6 or 7% nationally. So even if he wins Iowa, what does the path look like forward for him?
Well, he's got to get that second win. He's got to continue building momentum. And you can imagine that New Hampshire voters will take a second look at him coming up in the morning. The real devastating thing for this, the person who is devastated most by a potential strong showing from Buttigieg would be Joe Biden, the other main actor in that sort of moderate lane. If he is playing the most electable candidate, and he can't get elected in the state of Iowa, he can't win the state of Iowa on the Democratic side, then his rationale for being a candidate ends up being seriously undermined. And you can imagine that a lot of those Biden voters in places like New Hampshire, in places like South Carolina, are going to give Buttigieg a second look, in a lot of cases a first look, because, up until now, he just hasn't been a name on the national scene. But let's caution, though, we don't have any results coming in yet. I don't want to act like we're coronating a winner already or something.
We have zero results whatsoever. And Reed, I also want to ask you about a crazy scenario which I saw floated by Sean Trendy, which is that we could have different winners for all three. We could have a different winner for the first alignment, a different winner for the second, and then a different winner for the total number of delegates. How do we decipher something like that in that type of situation?
Well, what is this ultimately a contest about? It's about collecting delegates. The Associated Press is going to declare a winner based on the number of delegate equivalents that every candidate gets. That's how the Hill is going to declare a winner. Basically, I mean, delegates are all that matters. You don't go to a convention in Milwaukee and say, hey, I've got more votes out of Iowa than anybody else. You say, I've got more delegates out of Iowa than anybody else. So keep an eye on those delegates. That's the number that matters.
And Reed, what do we know about where Biden stands with money at this point? Because he hasn't had the strength, certainly, of a Sanders or a Pete or a Warren in terms of fundraising. He does have a big super PAC backing him, but is he going to be running low on funds if he performs poorly here in Iowa?
Yeah, if you don't do well in Iowa, your money dries up real quick. It's difficult to see how anybody can regain momentum if they fall short of their expectations in the first round of balloting. And Joe Biden has already had some money troubles, as some of his other rivals, Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, and even Buttigieg, have raised much more than he has. I mean, the biggest stunner of the moment, I think, is that his inability to raise money as a former vice president and longtime sort of stalwart of the Democratic Party. If he falls short here, I mean, he better have something left in the bank to make a final stand in South Carolina, and that win there has to be big. Basically, if Biden has a weeknight tonight, his expectations go through the roof for the next couple of contests. He is under amazing pressure to perform, I mean, as soon as humanly possible.
Yeah, and what does it mean for Bernie, do you think, if there's kind of a mixed bag in terms of results? If there's if he wins the popular vote and Warren gets the second and Pete gets the delegate count, what do you think that spells in terms of Bernie Sanders? Because, for him, he really benefits from having a lot of people in the race splitting that more Democratic establishment vote.
Yeah, just to be clear, there's only one winner, and that winner is the person who takes the most delegates. So it doesn't matter who gets the most in the first round or the second round. We are going to declare a winner based on those delegate numbers.
Sure.
But, Sanders is going to try to spin that, and he's going to try to use those numbers to make the case that he should actually be the real candidate or whatever. Bottom line is we have all been well aware that no matter who comes in first in that first alignment, they are going to use it. It could be Buttigieg, it could be Biden, it could be whoever. They're going to try to use that to claim some kind of victory. The old line is there are 3 tickets out of Iowa. Well, now there are 3 results out of Iowa too. But it's just important for everybody to keep their eye on the one that actually matters.
That's a good point.
Because that is true. But on the other hand, what really matters out of Iowa? The narrative. And
that's
the momentum.
Actually, to that point, I want to ask you, Reed, which is that now it looks like the results are going to come in maybe a little bit later than we expected. I'm seeing actually a result here, or some speculation here, that it may not provide, the later it goes, basically, the less of a benefit it is to a potential winner. Because what do we have coming up? Tomorrow is the State of the Union for President Trump. Wednesday is the acquittal vote for Donald Trump in the United States Senate. We saw, Reed, actually ahead of the vote tonight, that it was the least amount of network television coverage for an Iowa caucus over the last, I think, 20 years that they've kept statistics on this. So from a media coverage perspective of this election, that's kind of astounding, and in how it's going to be impacted from from here on out.
Well, let me bring up the alternative to that. It may be the least that the network news have covered it. It is the most that Hill TV has ever covered.
That's right.
And more and more people are
the
getting
metric that really matters.
Right. Look, I mean, everybody's going to try to spin their possible results. The winner is going to have a good next couple of days. Bumper fundraising prop and a lead, an advantage, a headwind or a tailwind going into New Hampshire. Whether it's the biggest tailwind that the winner of Iowa's ever gotten, I don't know. We'll figure that out. We got Jonathan Easley and Kate Martell up on the ground in New Hampshire in the next couple of days, and they'll be the ones to tell you that.
Yeah, well, and Reed, let's actually we've got the New Hampshire Real Clear Politics average of polls that we can throw up right now just to show how things are positioned. This can change quickly based on the results when we eventually get them tonight out of Iowa. But Sanders has jumped up to a pretty sizable lead there over Joe Biden. Sanders at 26.5, Biden at 17.5. Then you've got Warren at 14. Pete also right around 14, and then on down the line. What will the campaigns do after tonight? What is, just logistically, where will they head? What does it look like? What do they do?
Yep. I was on the plane in 2008 when Mike Huckabee flew out of here after winning the Iowa Caucuses. We left. It was 7 degrees in Des Moines. We landed in Manchester. It was 3 degrees. That was not a fun night for me. I don't remember if I had the right kind of coat. But yeah, one fun thing to do about midnight, maybe 1 a.m. over here, check out some flight radar systems and you will softwares, things like that, and you'll see a whole bunch of direct flights from Des Moines to Manchester, DSM to MHP. They're all going to get on their private jets so that they can be there first thing in the morning when the sun comes up in New Hampshire, because the whole battleground shifts from here to New Hampshire.
There we go. And Reed, final question for you. Any indications on turnout? We were expecting, I think you said, if it hit the 300,000 number, that's when we knew that things were really real and that there was a historic turnout. I think they were prepared for around 250,000. Maybe anything that you can share with us for that, what that number is. I know we don't have any final tally right yet.
Yeah, no. So remember, the highest ever turnout among Iowa Democrats is 239,000 back in 2008. The party was preparing for a mammoth turnout this year, given the excitement and the number of campaigns that are working to turn people out. We saw a tweet a couple of hours ago from Sean Bagnuski. He's the chairman of the Polk County Democrats here in Des Moines. He said they prepared for mammoth turnouts, and they're already running out of new voter registration cards and things like that. So they were making photocopies as furiously as possible just to get them out to those precincts where supplies are running low.
Got it.
Very interesting.
Thank you, Reed.
Thank you. You're the best. We appreciate it.
You got it. See you guys.
All right.
All right, we are now going to bring in another friend of the show who's got all kinds of deep knowledge of Iowa and all these numbers. Kyle Kondik of Lisa Sabateau's Crystal Ball. Yeah, well, you can,
I know, Kyle.
What's going on,
we wanted
Kyle?
a lot more numbers for you.
So apparently the results 4 years ago came out a lot faster than they've come out tonight. Now, it sort of makes sense because really in 2016, you only had two legitimate viable candidates, and Clinton and Sanders was very close in many of these precincts. Here you've got all these different candidates. You've got a lot of people having to make difficult choices. You know, people like supporting people like Andrew Yang or Michael Bennett or whoever deciding, or even supporters of the Big Five candidates who don't become viable and then they have to go somewhere else. So there's just a lot going on here, and I think we also see how kind of messy the caucus process is, and sometimes with elections, and I think specifically kind of antiquated ones like caucuses, the closer you look at it and the closer the results are, the worse it actually looks in terms of the process. And boy, I do wonder if we could really be seeing a change next time because we're still early in the evening here. We don't know exactly how this is all going to shake out, but really not that many results to look at. The stuff from the entrance polls, which are going to get weighted differently once the results actually come out. Sort of a predictable story. Sanders doing great with young people, Biden doing better with older people. There's not a huge age disparity for, say, like Elizabeth Warren, and that's been true in a lot of the polls. So in some sense, the results have kind of helped confirm what we were sort of already thinking about the race. But in terms of the actual outcome, it looks like something of a muddle. I mean, I guess the one thing that's sort of come out is it seems like Buttigieg is maybe doing a little bit better than the polls that indicated. Sanders seems strong, like we expected. But again, just kind of a muddle.
Just to give you how different it is this time around. In 2016, at this time, 85% of precincts were reporting the results by 10:30. Right now, we have 2% that are right there.
It's a strong 2%.
Right, yeah, very strong.
But Kyle,
strong
actually
two.
put that in perspective, because when you have so little to go on, you tend to read too much into the results, right? How much should we be counting on these results at 2% to hold up over that? I know it's a very easy question, but I just want people to have their expectations.
Yeah, I mean, we shouldn't necessarily expect anything to really stay the same as it is. And one thing that I think some people were realizing as we kept getting these anecdotal reports from reporters and embeds at these various caucus sites is that there are a lot of people in Des Moines, a lot of people on college campuses, not necessarily a lot of people reporting from kind of more rural counties, sort of outlying, outside of Des Moines and Iowa City and other places in the state, college campuses. And so are there differences in, who's doing well in the rural areas? I would suspect that there would be differences.
So Kyle, actually, can we throw up the map of Iowa? It has the different regions. I want you to be able to maybe take the viewers through a little bit of this. I did some research into the historical trends. So there you go. So we've got, generally there. Take us a little bit into the Davenport area. I know that is where Bernie Sanders, that's kind of the industrial area that he's did particularly well in 2016. And then just take people through the map here on what they need to see if we ever get any numbers tonight.
So obviously this is, Democratic caucus, so different deal. But Northwest Iowa is pretty religious, pretty conservative. Generally speaking, Eastern Iowa, places like you mentioned Davenport, that's more sort of industrial, and also you saw a lot of like Obama to Trump voters in that part of the state. The first and second congressional districts, which are the two Eastern districts, those were both ones that were pretty strong for Obama in 2012, flipped to Trump in 2016. So we always talk about kind of white working class voters, white voters who don't have a 4-year degree. A lot of voters like that all across Iowa, but I'd say particularly in that eastern part of the state, which again is sort of emblematic of the kinds of places that are trending Republican these days. I know that this is a Democratic caucus, so it's different. It's a little bit different story. Iowa City, obviously you'd expect Sanders maybe would have his best performance there because that's where the University of Iowa is. Ames, directly north of Des Moines, that's where Iowa State is, and another college town, although probably not as obviously like kind of far left liberal as maybe Iowa City is. If you're looking for suburban places, obviously you'd look around
Polk County,
Des Moines, exactly. Yeah, Des Moines and West Des Moines. And again, I feel like if you're just on Twitter, like I've been just trying to track this, you're seeing a lot of reports from again, college campuses,
County,
urban areas. And again, that's fine, and there are more people in those places. Although it's also important to note that for complicated reasons, even some places that have higher turnout don't necessarily get more of the state level
delegates. That's another thing I wanted to get in with you, which is there's actually, I know, quite a bit of jawboning in Iowa because they get very upset because they say that, well, even in higher turnout areas, they don't give the same amount of delegates relative to the rural areas. And as I understand it, in that some of the more, north central Iowa and that is where Biden really could be having some good nights. And that is where the caucus, the delegate math in particular, can go up.
And look, if you're just trying to say, if you wanted to, we got all these polls of Iowa, and you wanted to say, hey, which polls did the best? You probably would use that first tally, just the overall support before anyone realigns, so because then you're picking up the candidates who didn't meet the 15% threshold, et cetera. But in terms of the actual, delegate results, obviously the delegates are what's important, but there's also you guys have been talking about the narrative that comes out of this.
That's important.
It may be that the sort of first round of results is a better sense as to what actual popular support for these candidates were amongst the actual people showing up at these events.
And look, again, guys, this is less than 2% reporting. Okay, so just keep that in mind. But I will say, based on the first alignment numbers, it actually pretty closely lines up with the Des Moines Register poll that didn't get released but got leaked. It's actually pretty close to those numbers, which is interesting and has that order in terms of the first alignment. But again, it's 2%, so don't read anything really into that. Kyle, what is the normal historic bump that a candidate can see if they do win Iowa?
There's sometimes is a bump, although to be honest, I kind of wonder about whether we'll see that this time, just because Sanders is already polling pretty well in New Hampshire. It's sort of a home state for him.
Right.
And, is this going to materially impact, say, Nevada and South Carolina down the line when you have really a different kind of electorate, certainly a much more diverse electorate, and South Carolina is going to be a majority African American. The other thing, and you all were talking about this with Reed, is that, we got State of the Union tomorrow night. We don't know when we're going to get results from this race. Impeachment on Wednesday, debate on Friday. Whatever sort of bump of a few points or whatever you might expect might just not even really show up.
I do want to say, so there's actually quite a bit of speculation online right now about quality control. People are reading a lot into that. They're saying, why quality control now? I think
Pete's campaign must have called in.
Pete's campaign is like, well, there was a single voter. But anyway, all right. So apparently, but we should remind people of this, as someone just flashed this, that Santorum and Romney had that whole kerfuffle over who the hell won Iowa back in 2012.
I think Santorum won, but to this day, I don't really know if it's quite clear. And again, that just shows that this is a really strange, antiquated process. And also, just in terms of how you think about, the norms and laws of the way our democracy works, some of the fundamental tenets are like the secret ballot. Well, you don't really have the secret ballot at this.
That's one of the weirdest things. You have to stand up in front of everyone.
There have been all these crazy stories of I think Buttigieg was like one vote short somewhere, and a son was yelling at his dad who was with Biden and said, "Hey, come over here, you're breaking my heart." Like, what?
And people are flipping coins, literally flipping coins. It's crazy.
That's also a thing. Is that there have been a lot of tiebreakers with these flipping coins, and on one hand you could say, well, this is sort of a cute relic, the town hall meetings and stuff.
Right.
But on the other hand, you think, boy, this is just, it really is.
It's a bizarre
relic, antiquated, however.
And of course, and also underpinning all of that in a not very representative state. Nothing against Iowa, but it doesn't match the demographics of the nation at large. So it is a little bit unusual in basically every respect. Talk a little bit about, though, the expectation setting game. The last few polls have shown Bernie Sanders surging there, so people are kind of expecting him to do well. So does that mean that he gets less of a media hype coming out of this if he does in fact do well at the end of the night?
I think that's probably fair, and also, fairly or unfairly, I think if Sanders doesn't win, it might actually look disappointing for him, even though maybe that wouldn't be fair. Although, I think if say Buttigieg finished first, and again, there are different kinds of firsts depending on first alignment, second alignment, delegate count. Buttigieg might end up being the story, although Buttigieg doesn't necessarily have anywhere to go after New Hampshire, just because his non-white support has been so poor. Now, there's always the chance that a candidate gets a big bump out of these initial contests, and then they go on to sort of build support. It's like a snowball rolling downhill. But I don't know if I see that really with Buttigieg, just because he's been so weak. Really, outside of Iowa and New Hampshire, I mean, he's a very well-funded candidate. I think he may have performed well in this state in part because he was running a lot of TV ads. He did a lot of earned media. He was on all the Sunday shows. So I think that might have helped him. But again, it might be that he has a hard time after Iowa and New Hampshire.
Well, here's an interesting stat I have in front of me, which is Warren is apparently, this is per NBC News, running third with Iowa women. And we know that about, 58% of the electorate this time around is women. So, it's kind of a surprising statistic there. I mean, she's probably doing worse with men.
She's tended to have disproportionate strength with women.
Right. So what does that tell you? Not with the, again, I'm giving you what the meager information that I have.
Well, actually, I have a question. Is Klobuchar ahead of her?
Yeah, I don't know. I literally just says women running third with Iowa, Warren running third with Iowa.
I guess this doesn't necessarily break on gender lines, although it is good to know, just for future contests, that Democratic caucus and primary electorates are usually close to 60-40 women, which makes sense just because women are more Democratic.
That's almost exactly what we have right here.
Yeah, and so if you look at exit polls, you're going to see it in the high 50s. So with Warren, I guess that is kind of surprising, although she also, I would imagine that, I haven't seen it specifically, but that it's much better with college-educated women than necessarily non-college women.
Yep.
And there is also this, this question that was the heart of the campaign for a couple weeks ago was the supposed Sanders suggestion that he didn't think a woman could win the election, and I think only Warren and Sanders themselves really know the truth of what happened in that. But I think it is fair to say that there are voters who are thinking about that question. Yeah. Do I think that there's a penalty for a woman candidate? I guess I really don't. But I think there are a lot of people who believe necessarily that there might be.
Yeah.
And so that maybe manifests in the way that voters think about this.
It may have actually backfired and raised the issue, the electability question that she wanted to ultimately quash, which I think, based on the polling that we've seen, that particular line of attack from her campaign on Sanders did not seem to pan out with her based on the polling.
It's hard to say that I couldn't sit here and tell you that it helped Sanders, but it didn't help Warren.
And it didn't hurt him.
Right, exactly, because otherwise you might have seen something different in the polls.
Honestly,
Sanders has really been doing better in polling all over the place.
I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of voters were like, what does a private conversation in a room between two friends that happened a year ago really have to do with me? They're thinking about healthcare, they're thinking about other things.
Right.
Kyle, I wish we had more numbers for you, but you did a fabulous job.
Yeah, you really did.
Contextualizing
meager information.
What we have.
And to give everybody a sense of how late this is taking, Barack Obama advisor David Axelrod tweeted, "We had already spoken and were well into our celebration and on our way to New Hampshire by now in 2000."
And that was a race with a lot of candidates too. It was very competitive. So I don't know what's going on tonight.
Well, something's going on.
All right, Kyle, stick with us. We're not letting you go yet.
Not yet.
We do have a little change of pace here for you, though. Not all of the moments have been heavy on the campaign trail. We've actually laughed a lot together over the past several months, certainly true.
That's right. So let's take a look at some of the moments that particularly made us chuckle.
I think you called me a liar on national TV.
What? I didn't lose my temper. What I wanted to do was shut this down.
You're a damn liar, man.
Senator Harris says she's proud of her record as a prosecutor and that she'll be a prosecutor president, but I'm deeply concerned about this record.
The mayor just recently had a fundraiser that was held in a wine cave full of crystals and served $900 a bottle wine.
I'm encouraging people to go to Pete'sWineCave.com so that they can donate to the real people's champion, that's Senator Bernard Sanders.
The only people on this stage who have won every single election that they've been in are the women, Amy and me.
The Affordable Care Act right now is 10 points more popular than the President of the United States.
You know what the talking heads couldn't stop talking about after the last debate? It's not the fact that I'm somehow number 4 on this stage in national polling. It was the fact that I wasn't wearing a tie.
I want to get in the middle, I just want to say hi, Bernie.
Yeah, good. Okay.
Tonight, the presidential contest has reached fever pitch, and the nexus of the race is Iowa.
The Democratic candidates, they brace for results from more than 1,600 precincts.
Will it be a squeaker, or will one contender break away from the pack?
We are all in for the Iowa caucuses. The night is not even over yet, folks. The precincts have closed in Iowa, but the vote totals are coming in.
Yeah,
I guess we don't really have anything.
Not so much. Here to help us, though, get in the weeds a bit is still Kyle Kondik, managing editor of Sabato's Crystal Ball, no relation, and also host of the Michael Brooks Show and great friend of the show, Michael Brooks.
That's right.
Michael, let me start with you as a Sanders supporter.
Indeed.
How do you feel about a potential Pete resurgence?
I feel really good about it.
You welcome it?
I welcome it. I mean, it's an incredible opportunity because, look, we already see this with Bloomberg, but people who kind of use these pseudo-woke arguments against Sanders in ways that are, unbelievable, like, oh, he has a problem with a different equity issue, and then, of course, the next day they'll be like, oh, he was actually, in favor of, anti-discrimination measures against the LGBTQ community in the 1970s, right? And with Bloomberg, you see people interested in him as a way to thwart Sanders, who are willing to overlook his record on stop and frisk and so on. And it's absolutely the same dynamic with Pete Buttigieg. I think, look, if he was a small town mayor and he had something interesting and worthwhile to say, that's fine. But I think it's really fair to say that he has basically no actual national level experience other than in covering up police brutality. That reminds me of something that you might see in a
Kyle,
larger context.
To this point, I mean, let's say if Pete Buttigieg does win tonight, as I've covered now, the fact that it is so late and that it could go even later means that the national media bump is going to be less. I covered particularly, I think the most important metric I've seen was on network television coverage, which shows that we are looking at 1/10 the amount of network coverage that we saw in the years prior. Significantly less. And honestly, it's probably going to be like that coming out. So my question for you is, with the RCP average, it is where it is. With New Hampshire, Buttigieg, number 4, kind of as good as it gets, really, in terms of demographic for him. How much of a bump do you think he would get out of that? He's gonna get percentage. He still has a debate. That's where Marco Rubio famously flubbed, completely lost there. And a lot of money could be coming his way. What do you think?
Well, there's also the possibility that New Hampshire will not necessarily want to ratify whatever choice Iowa makes. And I guess
that historical they want to go their own way.
They like
a classic example of that, probably the best known example of that in recent history, was Barack Obama wins Iowa. Looks like he's probably going to win New Hampshire, and then Clinton ends up winning that state, and that set up that marathon race. So again, it's possible that let's say if Buttigieg does in fact win. Of course, we don't know at this point.
Yeah, we have no
Sanders may still win, and
Warren may still win. Biden may still win. I mean, that's how little data we have. I just want to be really clear.
I would also say the stakes for Sanders to me are pretty high in New Hampshire, just because, and I think for Warren too, because that's kind of sort of home turf for them. I think it's a demographically favorable state for Sanders, and also for Buttigieg too. And so I think that particularly if Sanders doesn't win Iowa, New Hampshire I think becomes very important for him, but it's pretty important regardless.
Well, I want to share an important update here. This is the worst possible news that I could bring you, which is that hearing from multiple campaigns, the Iowa Democratic Party is sending a tech staffer to a shared boiler room in Des Moines, Iowa, where campaigns have staff headquartered in order to brief them momentarily on what's going on. So everybody buckle up, folks.
Shutdown of Iowa.
We need a total and complete shutdown
to figure out
what the hell is going on.
I've always wanted to use that line.
Michael, let me ask you the easiest question of all time, which is,
I'm good at those.
All the people who were so concerned about the supposed whiteness of Sanders' coalition last time around, are they going to have the same concerns about Pete's coalition this time around?
Well, I mean, right, of course not. But in addition to the obvious hypocrisy and disingenuity of it, I think we do have to really start looking at these numbers. That Sanders, it's important he wins New Hampshire, certainly, but I don't know we could say that it's necessarily exactly in his wheelhouse. I think you could see that in the way he's climbing in Nevada and California as an example. Do you have some news that's coming through?
No, I think that's right. I'm just sharing so just a little bit of an update. We have an update from a Bloomberg reporter who just spoke to a precinct captain there, saying that one precinct chair told me he still has not been able to report his results because the phone app is not working. And he's been on hold for the call hotline for more than 30
Can we also shut technology down so we figure out what the hell is going on?
Paper ballot.
Write down your choice.
Technology is bad.
There were some.
Yeah, go ahead.
Technology
Give
is
us
not
an
good.
I think we should just take a Twitter poll and just go with that.
Yeah, right.
That would favor our demographic.
There were some complaints during the day that the app wasn't working, and so it might be coming home to roost now. But yeah, I mean, really, enough with this caucus thing.
Yeah.
I mean, really.
Well, that's not even the caucus thing.
Yeah,
that's this app nonsense.
But also the caucus reported it.
Yeah,
but,
sure.
Kyle, let me ask you this question to get away from our hating on Iowa.
I'm hating on technology.
I actually love Iowa.
I'm hating on the DNC.
I also look. You do a YouTube show. You can't hate technology, all right?
Well, hey, I'm selected.
So Kyle, we saw a South Carolina poll come out that had Biden's lead slipping there down to 5 points, with Bernie Sanders and Tom Steyer hot on his heels in that state. This is a poll that previously had him up by 31 points. So massive erosion there that could be indicative of, it's one poll, you never want to read too much into it. Could be indicative of a broader trend throughout the South. If Biden does have a bad night tonight, which that final Des Moines Register poll that wasn't released, but we all found out the results anyway, and as the anecdotal evidence seems to suggest, how quickly do you think things could crumble for him?
Well, look, there's the possibility that he won't win any of the first 3 races, and there's also the possibility that another single candidate will win the other 3 races. And Sanders seemed like a threat for weeks, and in part because Sanders has been, it seems like, is leading nationally with Hispanics. Now I think it's the data is a little bit muddy on that, but you see, I don't think you see that manifested in the polling in Nevada, which has been pretty good for Sanders. In California, had been pretty good for Sanders. Competitive in Texas, probably not leading there. But if Biden loses South Carolina, that's it. He has to win South Carolina, and then you get to the situation where does Bloomberg essentially try to become the Biden replacement, which is Bloomberg's plan, I think.
Right. So I want to give a new statement from the Iowa Democratic Party. Just broke. The integrity of the results is paramount. We have experienced a delay in the results due to quality checks and the fact that the Iowa Democratic Party is reporting out 3 data sets for the first time. What we know right now is that around 25% of precincts have reported. Early data indicates that turnout is on pace for 2016.
So not a massive turnout.
I don't really know what the hell is going on. But Kyle, thank you so much for joining us. I know we have to get you out of here very quickly.
Kyle.
Thank you so much. We really appreciate it. Michael, you're going to hang out with us for a little bit. Meanwhile, we're going to take a look at this, and we're going to be back with a second and with our panel. Stay tuned.
I know what's broken. I know how to fix it, and I'm going to lead the fight to get it done.
We have to get our country working for us again instead of the other way around.
I'm running because the decisions we make in the next 3 or 4 years are going to decide how the next 30 or 40 go.
We must do more than just defeat Donald Trump. We need to deliver a win for the American people.
We have to restore the soul of this country.
Nothing will change unless we have the guts to take on Wall Street, the insurance industry, the pharmaceutical industry, the military-industrial complex, and the fossil fuel industry.
It is not left, it is not right, it is forward.
And then let's just go live whenever. We're back with a friend of the show, Michael Brooks. He's host of the Michael Brooks Show. You got a little bit of a behind the scenes going on there right now.
Saagar and I are going to do what's called tap dancing.
That's right.
All the things that we don't know so far.
That's right.
Listen, as we've been saying throughout the night, we know very, very little about 2% reporting. We can throw the final caucus alignment numbers up on the screen so people can see just where we're at. It has Pete with a narrow lead over Bernie Sanders at this point. Elizabeth Warren coming in third, Biden in fourth. That last Iowa Des Moines Register poll that did not come out, but then was ultimately leaked, had a different order. It had Sanders and then Warren and then Pete and then Joe. I want to emphasize that we know very, very little. There were apparently some technical difficulties.
Right.
The Iowa Democratic Party has never done this, releasing all these vote totals things, so they're figuring that out. They're trying to quality control all of this so that we can all don't get the results.
So the real speculation right now is whether quality control is the new hanging Chad. And so I'm going to throw that to all of our panel. I'm beginning it now. It's starting now. We are back with friends of the show, Michael Brooks, and our panel, Democratic strategist Andrew Feldman, Maximilian Alvarez, host of the Working People's Podcast, Rachel Bovard, she's Senior Director of Policy at the Conservative Partnership Institute. You know, guys, we had this thing all planned so that we could all break down the results because we were supposed to know, but now there's quality control issues, and I want to reiterate the last statement. I read this right before the break from the Iowa Democratic Party is that the integrity of the results are paramount. We've experienced a delay in results due to quality checks and the fact that it's reporting out 3 data sets for the very first time. What we know right now is 25% of precincts have reported, and early data indicates turnout is on pace for 2016, Andrew. So one thing we know is this is kind of a disaster for the Iowa Democratic Party.
They're not.
They are not having a very good night over there. What are you hearing from maybe some of your inside context about what the hell is going on?
It's a mess.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what I'm hearing. I'm hearing it's a mess. I'm hearing that people want to file their stories. They don't know what the hell to do. I mean, it's like
everyone's pissed off, including me.
No,
We're trying to get to bed here.
I'm tired.
Got a morning show.
I'm tired.
Yeah, I would like some rest. I have yoga in the morning.
Right.
Max, let me talk to you about this. So I got some numbers from the Bernie campaign, from the Satellite Caucus for Spanish speakers in Muscatine, Iowa. Is that how you say that right? It was Bernie 17, Pete 5, Yang 2, Biden 1. No other candidate had any supporters. That's total number of supporters. So Sanders overwhelmingly outperforming there. And look, this is one sample caucus site. But I do think it meshes with what we saw earlier with the workers, the mostly immigrant workers from the pork processing plant who caucused for Sanders. It seems like their approach of reaching out to communities that don't normally have organizers come into them, don't normally get that kind of contact, is paying some dividends here tonight that we can see.
I think it is. And I mean, I think on the other side, you have seen how it has benefited Bernie's candidacy itself, right? I mean, like when you reach out to these demographics, these communities, right? When you go knocking on people's doors, when you stand outside of the meatpacking plant at the middle of the night, right? You are hearing stories from people who are struggling in this country, and then you are telling everybody that you know that we need to address these things. And I think that, you know, one thing that's been really impressive about Bernie Sanders' campaign is that sort of feedback loop between the just like incredible ground game, all the people texting, all the people canvassing, and the way that the information and the stories that they are kind of coming into contact with, the people who they're talking to, that gets filtered up. Right. People listen to that. So, right? Yeah.
One thing I want to highlight for the panel here is that what people are highlighting is that they said that turnout is on pace for 2016, Rachel. So that actually means that turnout is quite low. Only 172,000 turned out at that time. And we were actually expecting numbers in the 250,000 range to surpass the 2008 Iowa caucuses. So if turnout is low, that's actually not great for some of the more insurgent candidates, maybe like an Andrew Yang.
On turnout?
That's true. Maybe we can't trust anything that's coming from these people. That's the new hanging Chad. But let's say it is true. What do you make of that?
Well, first of all, wasn't this app developed by Robbie Mook?
Yes, there you go. I heard about this. Yes, yes. He screwed us again.
Why is Robbie Mook not locked in a pyramid?
Yeah, right. Well, that is
metaphorically.
But to that note, you know, I do think this who you are seeing turn out is going to tell us a story, right? Because I think we've talked a lot about sort of the class narrative, but also the age narrative, and I think that's going to break down with kind of who turns out, because you really do have this boomer. You don't think so?
Yeah. Oh, sorry.
No, I'm shaking my head at the control room. You're asking me a question. Ignore me over here. Everything is like, I can't trust anything right now.
Yes.
But no, you have like a boomer versus Gen Z narrative, right? With Bernie really speaking to the college students, and you have this wine cave boomer demographic going for the Buttigieg Biden, and then the class narrative. And I do think that is going to trend into the general, right? This is the story of the modern Democratic Party. And it's the story of modern America.
So here's a fascinating thing. The caucus secretary for one of the precincts has been on the hold for over an hour.
Oh my God.
And they have 6 delegates. They can't even get through to the main thing. And this
you know what's interesting about this?
Go ahead.
Is that this feeds at least a lot of people in the Sanders coalition, setting aside making it conspiratorial or anything like that.
Right.
This is a living enactment of the failure of institutions that his coalition is running against and experiencing on a daily basis.
Personally, I think it's the Russian bots. That must be what's going on.
Well, that would be what the wine cake contingent would definitely think. But my question for them is, why is Pete overperforming then? That's what we really have. What is the Russian?
Their wine
Good question.
The bots are in the wine cake.
What is the Russian connection?
The bots are inside.
The bots, it's coming.
This is what happens when you have to talk for 2 hours and you have no information. You begin to lose your mind.
Andrew, question for you, because you have a lot of contacts in Warren world. What are you hearing from them tonight? How do they feel about their turnout? We haven't honestly talked about her that much.
Look, I really think that people don't really know what's going on. But I think that Warren is confident, confident in her strategy, which was we have field organizers across this state. We are there early. I think they were happy with some of the turnout we saw with the crowds, with Bernie 1, Warren 2, and some of these precincts that were on on TV. I mean, look, I don't think. And I've been in a lot of war rooms over the years. If someone is telling you, well, we're looking good with 2% reporting, that you're going to start celebrating. I mean, this is a complete disaster. Right. I mean, and Troy Price took over the Iowa Democratic Party. He was seen as someone that could finally stabilize what had been a mess for a long time. Well, this is a joke.
Right.
I mean,
it is a joke.
This is the only type of election that is not run by a governing body. I mean, that's an independent. I mean, why we have our political party?
And again, we should send in UN election.
I do want to. I saw that. I want to highlight the stakes here for whoever does end up winning, because what ends up happening here is that it's 11 p.m. on the East Coast. Most people said, "Screw it, I'm going to bed at this point." Right? I'll check when I wake up.
Not our people.
Our people are all watching, and I love you guys. I'm checking my Twitter mentions right now.
Go buy our book if you're bored.
Yeah. By the way, please do that. But I mean, while I'm checking this, I'm realizing it's 11 p.m. here on the East Coast. Tomorrow, Rachel, is the State of the Union. The day after that is the acquittal vote for President Donald Trump. It's a wash right now in terms of national media bump. And if I am the person who wins the Iowa caucuses, I'm pissed. I just lost the millions of people who all had their TVs turned on, and they were ready to see me give my nice victory speech, depart on that plane to New Hampshire. There's none of that for them tonight.
No, I think the Democrat establishment national committee is in trouble because you have these leaked stories of them trying to flip the convention so Bernie doesn't win. You have the Iowa caucuses going up in flames. I mean, nothing is looking, nothing is looking good.
That's the point I'm making earlier, that it feeds, and that's why I think, especially if there's some type of multi-count scenario that comes out, you will have, the multi-narratives, basically.
I think your point about institutions is an important one, because the fact of the matter is, and again, this is not to spin anything conspiratorial, fact of the matter is that people don't trust these institutions. They don't trust these party officials, and they have good reason to not trust these party officials. So when you have a delay in the result like this, when it's when it's taking so long, there's quality control issues, et cetera, that only exacerbates that trust deficit, which is a real problem. That's not a joke.
Well, it's already there 100%.
It's going to cast doubt on the result too, especially like I saw a tweet that's like, "Oh, we quality control until Pete Buttigieg edges out." Right. Like it's going to cast doubt.
This is a metaphor for the Democratic establishment writ large, right? Like it better be the Russians, right? It better, like Stephen Miller better be like in a cupboard somewhere chewing on the wires that is preventing the numbers from telling us.
Just for fun.
Right, because if it's not, then what's the option, right? What's the option? This is why I've always been skeptical of the new Democrats' love for Silicon Valley and innovative industries. You can't innovate yourself out of being stupid, right? You can't innovate yourself out of terrible strategies that ignore the people that you should be speaking to, and instead throwing around an app like it's going to be the new savior, and then just shooting yourself in the foot with Obama's healthcare rollout. It's just a never-ending comedy of errors, and they can't stop shooting themselves in the foot.
We have slightly updated results. We got
one more precinct.
Two more precincts in. But I want to put them up though, because it shows you how little we know, right? Because Pete had been in the lead, and then Bernie, and then now Pete is in third, and Bernie is in first, Warren's in second, Pete, Amy, and then Joe.
Wow.
Again, look, It's less than 2% in, okay? These numbers are meaningless. They're meaningless. We really don't know from this anything at all, and that's the point I want to make, is that this is nothing so far.
So another update.
There's so few in that we can't really say much of anything
It does.
about.
One update I just saw, Andrew, is that they're actually going to paper, is that the system, the online system in which they were supposed to be reporting, this is just according to one person, an Iowa precinct, they are using paper now in order to transmit the ballot. So, I mean, who the hell?
I certainly trust random person on Twitter more than Iowa Democratic Party.
This is at this point.
I hope Robbie Milk has a lot of savings so he can return what he got paid for this app.
No. I mean, that's not how this works. He cashes out and then everybody gets screwed. That's how it generally.
I mean, let's not forget that, like, irrespective of this like whole app nonsense, there's still caucuses that are flipping coins to decide crap tonight.
Yes, literally.
Right? I mean, the system doesn't have to be broken as phenomenally as it kind of currently is for it to still be dumb, right? And I think that all of that is on display.
That was such a great point, though, about the Democratic Party and this fusion of wonkery with incompetence. The fact that they keep having this like obsession with quote unquote smartness and then not delivering the goods on it. That was the Clinton campaign.
Yeah.
It was all these stories and all these right-wing conspiracy theories about how evil and awful they are. Well, if only it were so.
Yeah.
They don't even have the efficacy to not be at Martha's Vineyard while they're campaigning against Donald Trump. And so this is another example. Oh, let's have an app. Let's do that. Maybe Uber can deliver the app results somehow through some type of cloud service.
Well, Michael, I
here we are.
see that Chris Matthews said Bernie was going to do well tonight because a caucus is like a meeting and socialists love meetings.
I have to say,
that seems
as a
like pretty great
socialist,
analysis
I hate meetings, but I will give Chris credit. I think he had a beer with a doctor.
With a doctor, right? Yeah. All right.
Let's throw out the numbers we do have. If we can go back to Bernie Sanders, who has the top amount at this point. This is the final alignment. I think Bernie was at 28. There he is. Then what do we have next? Warren, I believe, at 25, if memory serves.
22% I have in front of me.
25%. Okay. And then who do we have next up here? And again, 2% reporting, guys. Is nothing. Mayor Pete has, drum roll please, at 2%.
It's coming.
There
it's
he is,
coming.
24%. And then who do we have? Is it Klob that comes in next? Biden next.
Right.
At 11%. Ouch.
But don't read too much into it because we don't know what's going on.
This going back to your point earlier, I mean, this is terrible for anyone that is looking to claim victory in the next days. Also, the whole narrative is going to be about this snafu and not about anyone who did well tonight or did terrible. I mean, it's all about the Iowa Democratic Party, and that's a great thing for Trump to be able to jump on and say that we did
something. By the time we have numbers, we'll talk about the numbers.
It's certainly possible. I am seeing.
I
am seeing. I will say the Trump campaign is capitalizing on this, Rachel. I mean, it's pretty funny. They're all like, "It's rigged. It's rigged."
They wouldn't be doing their job if they were.
Yeah, I know. I mean, if they weren't sowing discord in the DNC, I mean, I guess that is what they do here.
Didn't they have Project Orca? Was that Mitt Romney?
Okay.
Republicans have had their own share of this.
Yeah, that's right.
Orca. Oh man,
I
that's a good draw from the archives.
That is a really
project.
Good
and remember, it was so vaunted, and
I know
this is an amazing thing.
So much money on this,
and then it just completely collapsed.
It was like,
based on the feedback I'm getting, everybody is loving how much we're screwing around here because we have no information.
Basically, things will go as I want them to go.
Okay,
that's my prediction.
That's your bottom line prediction.
That's my bottom line prediction. I want to learn my Chris Matthews. Why can't I make up imaginary friends to prove my points?
It does look like, though, based on the polling, based on the anecdotal evidence, that one thing that seems to be panning out is that Biden does not seem to be performing up to expectations, Max. What do you think that means going forward? Who do you think his supporters may go to? Because honestly, pundits tend to think of Bernie and Biden as these two totally separate camps. We know the reality is that Biden supporters choose Bernie Sanders as their top second choice. So his deterioration could ultimately benefit Sanders.
Right, and I think that what that tells you is something that we talked about on a previous segment when I was on this show, right, is that I genuinely think there is like a significant contingent of, Democratic centrists who are never going to see eye to eye with me and vice versa, feelings mutual. But I think there is a significant number of people, especially, older folks, who whose main concern right now is beating Trump, right? And like they have this sort of faith in the technocracy that Biden and the New Democrats embody, in the kind of firewall of deal making and strategy and intelligence that they, have just like poured so much faith in over the years. And the more that you see Biden just deteriorating, live on camera, the more that you start to worry that if he gets on a debate stage with Trump, he's going to start sundowning and stripping off his clothes. Right. I think that you start to like really wonder, right? Like, this guy. Right. Who can beat Trump?
If Trump and Biden debate, the questions will be at the bottom of Cello.
That's right. All right, so one last update before we go. As an FYI, Bernie's people are apparently planned for this. This is a fan of the show tagged me in this. Develop their own app for logging the results, assuming the precinct captains are inputting information. So Bernie's camp actually might have more accurate numbers than the DNC. Will they release those numbers? We don't know yet. But,
we don't know.
Okay.
Guys,
everybody stick with us,
We wish we would have had more results to share with you now. We are going to take a break with our people, and hopefully if we get results anytime in the near future, we will come back
We will come right back up.
and share them. So you guys go over to Amazon and buy our book. It's called The Populist Guide to 2020. Send us an email at krystalandsaagar@gmail.com so we can send you your personalized video.
That's right.
May as well do the shameless plug since we're all here. Or go to Barnes & Noble. That also works as well.
Yeah.
We are so grateful for you guys hanging out with us. We will come back if we get results in the near future.
Yeah, we have had so much fun. And thank you all so much for joining us tonight. We'll be back with more expert analysis maybe later and especially tomorrow. I can't wait for tomorrow's show. You guys know that's going to be
Oh my gosh, we'll have it all tomorrow. All right, thanks guys. We will see you soon.